Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight, our quiet journey takes us far south, beyond the reach of roads, forests, and familiar skies, to a place wrapped in silence and snow. A place where wind carves ridges into frozen plains, and the horizon looks more like another planet than part of our own. This is Antarctica, the coldest, driest, and most untouched wilderness on Earth. It's a place of extremes, so empty that even sound seems hesitant to stay for long. But in the past decade, this icy world has stirred something warm in human imagination. Not because of the penguins or the glaciers, but because of shapes. Dark, angular, and startlingly geometric, half buried beneath the ice. Some call them mountains. Others, with a gleam of wonder in their voice, call them pyramids. Now, whether those shadows are carved by nature or designed by hands we no longer remember, the idea itself has captured people's dreams. Pyramids in Antarctica. The thought alone is enough to make even the most skeptical mind pause, if only for a moment, because it asks a question older than any civilization we know. What if the story of human history is missing a chapter? What if something once thrived here, in the place we now call unlivable? And what if the cold itself has been guarding those answers, keeping them safe beneath its glassy vault for tens of thousands of years? Before we drift deeper into that mystery, I'd like to ask, where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere warm, perhaps? Somewhere where the thought of ice feels distant, like a dream? Or maybe you're already surrounded by winter, listening as the wind hums outside your window. Wherever you are, imagine this. A continent so vast that it holds about 70% of Earth's fresh water, so bright it reflects half the sunlight that touches it, and yet so dark in its unknowns that entire legends bloom just from looking at its map. If you find this quiet exploration soothing, if it helps your thoughts unwind while curiosity lingers softly in the background, I'd be grateful if you left a like or subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach others who might be drifting off right now, somewhere else in the world, following the same gentle voice through the same questions. So, settle in. Breathe a little slower. Let the warmth around you balance the chill of the story ahead. Because tonight, we're going to follow a trail that starts with a few satellite images, a handful of coordinates, and an ancient pattern our minds can't help but recognize. Somewhere between the folds of science and speculation, between mountains and myth, lies the whisper beneath the ice. It began quietly enough, as most modern mysteries do, with a blurry image on a glowing screen. In the mid-2010s, a set of photographs taken from satellite data began circulating online. They showed what appeared to be a dark, triangular shape rising from the endless whiteness of Antarctica's Ellsworth Mountains. The lines were sharp, the symmetry uncanny, and before anyone could measure or verify, the word pyramid started to spread. Not just one, but three, each miles apart, forming what some claimed looked almost like deliberate placement. Within days, forums buzzed, blogs speculated, and theories multiplied like snowflakes in a storm. At first, geologists stepped in with quiet patience. They explained that mountains often take on triangular forms through natural processes: erosion, wind, freeze-thaw cycles, and the weight of ice sculpting stone. To them, this was a textbook example of a nunatak, a rocky peak poking through a sheet of glacial ice. Perfectly ordinary if you studied the planet long enough, but to others, it was anything but ordinary. They saw geometry where there should be randomness, smoothness where nature usually stumbles. The story caught on not because it was proven, but because it was possible, that fragile space between fact and fascination, where our need for meaning outpaces the data. Antarctica had always been mysterious, a blank page at the bottom of the globe. For centuries it was the last uncharted continent, a vast white question mark on every early map. And now, in an age when satellites can see every inch of Earth, It was offering new secrets, or at least the illusion of them. Scientists could explain away a shape, but imagination doesn't melt so easily. People began asking, what if? What if before Antarctica froze over it was home to something else? Not just penguins and moss, but people, or something like people, who built monuments to the sky, just as the Egyptians, Mayans, and countless others did. The speculation branched out in every direction. Some linked the pyramids to the lost city of Atlantis, others to extraterrestrial visitors, or to a forgotten civilization erased by an ancient cataclysm. Each theory found its audience because deep down, there's a quiet hunger for stories that place us within a larger pattern. We see pyramids across continents, across ages, and the mind wants connection. Surely it can't be coincidence, we think, that so many cultures built the same form, triangles pointing to the heavens, anchors between earth and sky. And if that pattern appeared even in the farthest, coldest corner of our planet, what would it mean for the story of civilization itself? But the truth, as always, is colder and subtler. Antarctica is not an easy place to verify anything. Its weather turns explorers back. Its ice moves, cracks and buries. Even today, only a fraction of its surface has been thoroughly studied. Beneath the ice lie mountains taller than the Alps, rivers that never see the sun, and lakes sealed away for millions of years. To investigate the so-called pyramids in person would mean a journey across lethal terrain, where one wrong gust can erase footprints in seconds. So, for now, the mystery remains pixel deep. Yet the fascination endures, because even if these dark peaks are nothing more than rock shaped by time, the idea of what might lie beneath them stirs something old in us. The belief that we are not the first, that the world has forgotten things too grand or too strange to survive in memory. Civilizations rising, falling and vanishing beneath waves or ice. It's a story as old as storytelling itself. And every new whisper, every strange photograph gives it another heartbeat. Imagine standing at the edge of one of those pyramidal mountains, the air so cold it feels more like glass than wind. Around you, the ice stretches to every horizon, glittering under a sun that never sets. There's no sound but the slow crack of shifting glaciers, the groan of a continent that never sleeps. In that silence, it's easy to understand why people see secrets here. The landscape feels deliberate, like something built rather than born. You feel watched, not by life, but by memory itself, ancient, patient, and indifferent. Still, the scientific story deserves its place. The peaks most often cited in these theories are part of the Ellsworth Range, a chain of mountains formed tens of millions of years ago when continents collided and folded upward. Over time, glaciers sculpted their slopes into the angular forms we now romanticize. The dark colour seen in satellite images likely comes from exposed rock where ice has retreated. What we interpret as walls or edges are shadows and ridges, exaggerated by light and perspective. In short, geology doing what geology always does, turning chaos into fleeting symmetry. But people rarely fall in love with the mundane. We love mystery more than we love certainty. A mountain becomes a pyramid because the word itself hums with history. It evokes builders, purposes, alignments with stars. It implies intent, and intent implies intelligence. The more remote the location, the more our imagination rushes to fill it. After all, how many places on Earth are left that we haven't already measured, mapped, and explained? Antarctica is one of the few remaining frontiers, and the human mind cannot resist turning frontiers into stories. In many ways, the legend of the Antarctic pyramid says less about what lies under the ice, and more about what lies within us. It's a mirror held up to our curiosity, our longing for continuity with the past, our refusal to accept that some corners of history may simply be empty. When we stare into that icy void, we're really looking for ourselves, an origin story that connects every scattered civilization, every lost language, every unanswered question about where we came from. Scientists, of course, continue their work, chipping away at the ice in other places, drilling cores and studying ancient air trapped inside. What they find is no less wondrous than the myths, just quieter. Layers of snow revealing the planet's climate history, particles from distant volcanoes, even tiny organisms that slept through millennia. The Earth remembers everything, even if we forget. And perhaps that's the deeper allure of the Antarctic mystery. The sense that beneath the ice, not just stones, but stories lie waiting. If someday explorers dig deeper into those frozen peaks and find only rock, some will sigh, others will smile, but the mystery will not truly vanish. Because what we're searching for isn't a pyramid at all. It's the feeling that there's more to know, more to uncover, more to imagine. Every photograph that sparks a legend keeps that feeling alive. And while satellites continue to orbit and scan, the ice continues its patient work, hiding, shaping, preserving and whispering. Antarctica has no memory of us. It doesn't need to. It has survived every era, every climate, every species that came and went. It's a reminder that Earth itself is the oldest storyteller, one that doesn't need words. When we gaze at its frozen expanse, we're listening to something vast and ancient humming beneath our small, curious lives. The question of the pyramids, like the question of time or consciousness, is simply another way we ask, who are we? And how long have we really been here? And so, the story drifts onward, from blurry images to endless theories, from skeptics to dreamers, from what science can measure to what wonder keeps alive. Somewhere under all that ice, truth sleeps. It may be simple, it may be complex, but for now, it is still. Waiting for the warmth of human curiosity to reach it. And as the wind moves over those silent slopes, you can almost imagine the sound. A low, ancient murmur, like stone remembering sunlight. The whisper beneath the ice. There's a strange comfort in realizing that the coldest place on Earth is also one of the quietest. Down there, beneath skies so pale they blend with the horizon, sound doesn't carry the way it does anywhere else. It moves differently, dampened by air so dry and thin it almost feels weightless. The silence isn't empty though. It hums in its own way, a slow frequency of ice expanding, contracting, and breathing through centuries. Antarctica feels alive, but its life is measured not in days or seasons, but in epochs. To understand why so many stories grow from this frozen desert, you have to feel what it means to stand in a landscape that seems endless, featureless, and yet somehow aware. Most people picture Antarctica as pure white, a blank canvas of snow stretching endlessly under a hard blue sky. That image isn't wrong, but it leaves something out. There are colours there, if you look long enough. The snow, under the right light, holds shades of blue so deep they seem to pull your gaze inward. The ice, fractured and ancient, reflects faint greens, the ghosts of algae trapped long ago. And then there's the black. Not the black of night, but of rock, raw, exposed and defiant against all that brightness. It's that darkness that first gave rise to the legend, the idea that beneath the blinding white something older waited, half revealed. The black peaks scattered across the continent stand like memories that refuse to melt. Some are small and jagged, others vast and smooth, like the edges of pyramids cut from obsidian. Their sharpness seems deliberate, though it's only the slow work of geology, the grinding of glaciers, the pressure of ice carving away at stone, until coincidence looks like purpose. Still, when seen from above, from a satellite passing silently hundreds of miles overhead, those shapes seem too precise, too measured. Even scientists privately have admitted how uncanny they look. It's human nature to recognize patterns, and even the most trained eyes can feel a moment of hesitation before logic reclaims the thought. Antarctica's terrain hides more than most places because the ice itself is alive. It flows, though at a pace so slow it seems still. Underneath that frozen ocean of land lies a topography more dramatic than any mountain range we know. A buried world of valleys, rivers and mountains, some higher than the Alps. It's called the Gamburtsev Range, and it's entirely entombed beneath miles of solid ice. Scientists discovered it using radar in the 1950s, astonished to find a whole mountain chain no one had ever seen. The peaks were smooth in the scans, but when they mapped them in detail, they found ridges and slopes that matched the profile of ancient ranges elsewhere. Nobody knows exactly how they formed, or why they've survived so perfectly preserved under all that weight. When people talk about hidden pyramids, perhaps they're reaching for the same mystery that haunts the Gamburtsev Range, the sense that something vast and structured lies beneath, unseen but not forgotten. The ice above those mountains is over 1 million years old. Each layer, pressed tight against the next, holds air from another time. Scientists drill deep to extract cores, long cylinders of ice that serve as pages in a diary written by the planet itself. Every trapped bubble is a piece of ancient atmosphere, every layer of dust a whisper of past seasons, volcanic eruptions, or cosmic dust that fell from space. Studying them, researchers can read the story of Earth's climate, its fluctuations, its breaths and fevers. The idea that beneath that same ice there might be relics of civilization is romantic, but it also reflects something real. Antarctica is the archive of the planet, the one place where time has been slow enough to keep its own secrets. Imagine walking across that landscape. The sun circles overhead without setting, and shadows spin slowly across the surface. The horizon never changes, and there are no trees, no landmarks, only the sound of your boots on compacted snow, the crunch of it like static underfoot. Your breath fogs the air in front of you, and every few steps the ice cracks faintly beneath the strain of temperature. In that vastness, scale loses meaning. You could be walking across a glacier or the roof of a buried city. It's impossible to tell. Distance bends with the brightness. Things far away seem close, and things near seem distant. It's easy to understand why, when explorers first came here, some thought they were walking across the edge of the world. Early explorers saw plenty of shapes that tricked their eyes. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, expeditions led by men like Shackleton and Amundsen described mirages, mountains that weren't there, shadows that stretched against the horizon and vanished when approached. The Antarctic air bends light in strange ways. It's so cold and so layered that it acts like a lens, projecting distant objects over the curve of the Earth. A rock formation hundreds of miles away might appear on the horizon as a pyramid or a tower floating above the ice. When you walk toward it, it drifts away, disappearing like smoke. The landscape plays with perception. You could be standing in a desert of white, yet the world keeps rearranging itself around you. That distortion extends beyond the physical. Time, too, seems to warp here. Without nightfall or sunset, the hours lose their meaning. A day stretches into another without distinction, and after a while, the body forgets when to wake or rest. Even the sound of your own voice feels out of place, like an intrusion. In that silence, thought grows loud. You start noticing things you'd normally miss. The way frost forms on your eyelashes, the faint crackling sound of snowflakes settling, the hollow hum that comes when wind passes over a crevasse. The longer you stay, the easier it becomes to imagine the impossible. That somewhere under your feet, hidden by miles of frozen time, something old might still be waiting. There are places in Antarctica that no human has ever seen directly. Satellite imagery helps, but vast stretches remain untouched. Beneath the ice lie subglacial lakes, sealed off from the atmosphere for millions of years. Lake Vostok, one of the largest, sits under nearly 4 kilometers of ice. Scientists drilled into it carefully, terrified of contamination, and found microbial life forms, tiny, resilient, alien in their isolation. They had evolved in total darkness, under immense pressure, sustained by the faintest traces of chemical energy from rock below. If life can exist there, sealed away for ages, the idea of finding something else, something larger, something built, suddenly feels less absurd. Nature itself has proven it can preserve what it hides. Those who believe the pyramid theories often point to these lakes and caverns as potential sanctuaries. They imagine a time before the ice, when Antarctica was warm and green, a land of rivers and forests. Geological evidence suggests that around 90 million years ago it truly was. Fossilized wood, pollen, and even the remains of dinosaurs have been found there. In that ancient world, the continent sat farther north, still connected to what would become Australia and South America. Only later did plate tectonics carry it south, isolating it, and the ice began its slow conquest. To some, this timeline leaves just enough room for myth, for the idea that maybe, just before the cold took hold, something intelligent could have left its mark. But when scientists study the soil and the fossils, they find no trace of civilization, only the steady record of natural change. The ice tells the story clearly. No fires, no metals, no artifacts. Still, our fascination persists, because even when evidence says no, imagination keeps whispering yes. It's not that people believe easily, it's that the unknown invites belief. When we encounter something vast and unmeasured, our minds fill the gaps. Antarctica, more than any place on Earth, is all gaps. White silence and black rock, endless, shifting, and waiting to be understood. The Black Pyramids, as they're often called, sit within that mental space between the known and the wished for. They are symbols now, icons of hidden possibility. Even scientists who debunk them acknowledge their strange beauty. There's something poetic about how a trick of light, a quirk of erosion, can ignite such global wonder. It reminds us that science and mystery aren't opposites, they're companions. One measures, the other imagines. Together they keep us curious, reaching farther, asking why the world looks the way it does. If the Antarctic pyramids turn out to be nothing more than mountains, that doesn't make them less fascinating. It only deepens the question of why we wanted them to be more. From above, the continent looks like another planet entirely. The white stretch is unbroken for thousands of miles, interrupted only by fractures where glaciers meet the sea. From space, the patterns of those cracks resemble veins or rivers frozen mid-motion. Every now and then, patches of exposed rock appear, dark smudges against the blinding light. Those are the nunataks, the tips of mountains peeking through the ice sheet. To a camera, they could be ruins or fortresses, but even stripped of myth, they hold a quiet grandeur. They are reminders that the Earth is always sculpting itself, always blurring the line between accident and design. Standing there, if you could, you'd feel how thin the boundary is between belief and perception. Your eyes would tell you one thing, your instruments another, and your mind something else entirely. The endless white isn't just a landscape, it's a mirror. It reflects whatever you bring to it. Wonder, skepticism, loneliness, hope. The hidden black beneath it gives those feelings shape, contrast, and depth. Together, they form the perfect stage for mystery. And maybe that's why the story endures. It isn't really about what's there, but about the kind of world we hope might still exist. The explorers who come here now carry instruments far more advanced than those early cameras, but even they admit the same sense of awe. Drones scan the ice, radar penetrates miles below, yet every answer reveals new questions. They find valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, hidden lakes and strange magnetic anomalies that don't quite fit expected models. Each discovery fuels another wave of speculation. What if the reading suggests something artificial? What if that geometric echo isn't just coincidence? In the quiet of their data labs, even scientists pause sometimes, just long enough to wonder. For now, though, the Black Pyramids remain what they've always been. Shapes in the snow, half seen through layers of distance and imagination. But they've already done something remarkable. They've reminded people that the Earth still holds secrets, that not everything has been mapped, explained, or captured. In an age where information floods every moment, That realization feels rare and comforting. There are still places we can dream about without spoiling them by knowing too much. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can picture it. The sun glancing off ice like glass, the air shimmering in the distance, a shadow rising where it shouldn't be. For a heartbeat, it looks like the work of ancient hands, forgotten under snow. Then the wind shifts, and the illusion changes. The mind knows what the eye saw but refuses to let go. Maybe that's the real secret Antarctica keeps. Not what's buried beneath, but the way it reminds us that mystery still exists, waiting quietly, endlessly, under the white. And somewhere deep within that silence, something stirs. Not a civilization perhaps, but an idea. That every mountain might hold a story. That even in a world of data and certainty, wonder can still survive the cold. The wind carries that thought across the plains, brushes it against the black stone, and lets it vanish into the endless white, leaving behind only the faint impression of a question. What else might be waiting there, unseen, unmeasured, and unimagined beneath the ice that never forgets? When people first saw the images, they didn't come from explorers trudging through blizzards or scientists in bulky suits beside humming machines. They came from the quiet orbit of satellites, machines circling hundreds of miles above the planet, watching through lenses that never blink. It was there, among the endless swirls of white and shadow, that those shapes appeared. Triangular, dark-edged, perfectly outlined against the smooth folds of ice. To most who glanced at them, they were nothing more than geological quirks, tricks of light, or digital distortion. But to others, they were evidence, a whisper of something the world had forgotten. The fascination began to spread the way such things always do, quietly at first. Someone zoomed in on an image, noticed the symmetry and shared it. Then another person saw the same pattern in a different part of the continent. Soon there were threads, forums, and videos, each one more certain than the last that these were not coincidences. Words like structure and alignment began to appear, alongside coordinates and grainy photos. And within weeks, the idea of pyramids in Antarctica had transformed from curiosity into conviction. Those images, still easy to find online, show three main peaks, dark and sharply defined against the snow. They're located near the Ellsworth Mountains, a range older than many continents. From one angle, the peaks look almost identical in height and proportion. From another, they form a triangle, a shape humans can't seem to stop finding meaning in. Some measured the distances between them and found near-perfect ratios, enough to stir imagination. Others noted how those ratios seemed to echo familiar alignments. The Giza Plateau, the Orion Belt. It was enough to turn coincidence into speculation, and speculation into something that looked like history waiting to be rediscovered. But patterns, as scientists often remind us, are patient liars. The human brain is wired to seek them out, even when none exist. Psychologists call it pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, or meaning in randomness. It's what makes us turn constellations into stories, or hear whispers in static. To a mind trained by evolution to find order in chaos, Antarctica is a blank slate begging to be filled. Every ridge and shadow becomes a potential message, every straight edge a sign that someone long ago left a mark. Geologists studying the images quickly offered explanations. The pyramidal forms, they said, were the natural result of glacial erosion. Over time, as ice moves across rock, it grinds away the softer layers and leaves behind harder peaks shaped by intersecting valleys. These are called pyramidal nunataks, a term that sounds almost poetic but describes a simple truth of nature. You can find them in Alaska, in the Alps, even in Iceland, places where ice and stone dance their slow grinding waltz. The symmetry that looks so intentional from above is simply the outcome of time and pressure, working on scales we can barely comprehend. Yet, even as scientists explained, curiosity refused to die down, because the more we looked, the more questions surfaced. Why were these peaks so perfectly shaped? Why did the angles seem so clean, the lines so distinct? And if they were just mountains, why did they feel so out of place, so deliberate against the surrounding terrain? It's difficult to blame anyone for wondering. Antarctica is not a land that gives up its secrets easily. Beneath its surface lies an entire archive of unknowns, preserved in ice that could hide anything from meteorites to ancient fossils. If a civilization did once exist there, it would take centuries before we could even begin to look for its traces properly. There's also the simple truth that humans want to believe in connection. Across the globe, pyramids appear again and again. Egypt, Sudan, China, Mexico, Indonesia. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia all chose the same form, wide at the base, rising to a point, a shape that seems to defy time itself. It's stable, enduring, and spiritual. It bridges the ground and the sky, as if architecture itself were reaching upward in reverence. To imagine that the same form might appear on the frozen edge of the world feels almost inevitable. Whether by nature's hand or humanity's, the pyramid seems to belong everywhere. But in Antarctica, context changes everything. There are no known ruins, no remnants of cities or roads, no sign that humans ever lived there before the modern age. The oldest traces of life we've found are microbial, locked in layers of ice deep below the surface. That doesn't stop people from wondering, though. Because history, even the parts we think we know, is full of surprises. Every few decades, an archaeological discovery shifts the timeline. Stone tools older than expected. Civilizations more advanced than we thought possible. It's not unreasonable to ask whether something could have existed in a warmer Antarctica long before our records began. To explore that question, scientists have studied the continent's ancient climate. Around 90 million years ago, it was indeed warm, even lush. Fossilized tree trunks, leaves, and pollen have been found in sediment cores taken near the coast. Some of those trees stood in what we now call the South Pole. They grew under long days of sunlight and long nights of darkness, adapting to a rhythm that no modern forest experiences. That world disappeared when the continent drifted south, isolating itself from the warm currents that once flowed around it. The ice came slowly, creeping across millennia until it swallowed everything. If there were any traces of earlier life, human or otherwise, they would now rest miles beneath the surface, unreachable, waiting in perfect preservation. Still, the theory of lost civilizations continues to echo. Some suggest that what we call myths, Atlantis, Lemuria, Muay, might have been distant memories of real cultures erased by climate change or shifting continents. It's easy to dismiss such ideas as fantasy, yet history shows how often myth grows from kernels of truth. The flood stories found in so many ancient texts could reflect real events. Rising seas after the last ice age, when melting glaciers drowned coastlines and erased early settlements. So when people imagine that Antarctica's pyramids could belong to an ancient world now lost under ice, they're not only dreaming, they're remembering that the Earth has buried stories before. As the online fascination with the pyramids grew, researchers began to study the data behind the images. Some pointed out that the shapes weren't as perfect as they appeared. The angles varied, the edges were rough, and the scale, often miles wide, made human construction improbable. Others noted how the supposed symmetry was exaggerated by the way light fell during the satellite passes. Shadows in polar regions stretch far longer than elsewhere, turning small slopes into dramatic silhouettes. A single ridge could look like a wall, a minor depression could mimic a doorway. What looks deliberate from space dissolves into irregularity when mapped in 3 dimensions. Even so, the mystery never vanished entirely, because every explanation, no matter how reasonable, still leaves room for wonder. The satellite data might resolve some details, but there's always another peak, another shadow, another shape emerging from the white noise of the terrain. The human mind doesn't run on data alone. It runs on stories, and Antarctica offers one of the greatest blank pages imaginable. Each year, new expeditions venture south, each carrying instruments more precise than the last. They scan, measure, and record, yet somehow the feeling persists that maybe, just maybe, the next layer of discovery will hold something astonishing. Part of that comes from the landscape itself. Even stripped of myth, it feels otherworldly. The light never behaves the same way twice. In the summer it circles endlessly, casting a perpetual twilight that makes distances uncertain. In the winter, the darkness lasts for months, so complete that even stars seem dimmer. Within that rhythm of extremes, it's hard not to sense something timeless. The ice stretches in every direction, broken only by those dark geometric ridges. They stand as reminders that beneath all this motionless cold, the earth is still shifting, mountains still rise, ice still flows, the planet continues to sculpt itself in silence. There's a story told among some expedition crews, half joke, half superstition, that the ice remembers footsteps. They say if you walk long enough in one direction, you'll find traces of someone who walked there before, even if it's thousands of years apart. Maybe it's only poetic imagination, but it captures a truth about the place. Antarctica feels ancient, as if it has seen more than it lets on. Every gust of wind feels recycled from another era. Every shape in the snow could be both a geological formation and a fossilized memory of something that once was. Scientists sometimes call this the continent's duality. Its power to be both known and unknown, explained and mysterious all at once. They can describe the forces that sculpt its peaks, the chemistry of its ice, the physics of its glaciers. Yet they can't explain the feeling of standing before one of those dark formations, with the wind roaring in your ears and nothing but emptiness around. It's not fear exactly, but reverence, a recognition that the earth itself can outthink us, that it can shape illusions that look like messages simply by following the laws of time and pressure. Perhaps that's why people keep returning to the images despite every debunking and every lecture. The pyramids in the snow aren't proof of ancient builders or cosmic visitors. They're proof of something deeper, that curiosity itself doesn't freeze. Even when science answers the question, imagination stays warm. It keeps whispering that the world might still have corners we don't fully understand. And maybe that whisper, faint but persistent, is the real reason we keep looking. Each pixel of satellite data holds thousands of years of erosion, pressure, and reflection. Every image is a conversation between light and ice. When you stare at them long enough, it's hard to tell where fact ends and fascination begins. The sharp lines fade into gradients. The shadows blend into brightness. Somewhere in between, the truth waits. Not hidden, but layered. Like everything in Antarctica. What we see depends on how long we're willing to look and what we expect to find. So the shapes remain, etched in both snow and imagination. Some see geology, some see design, and both are right in their own way. Because whether made by hands or by the slow breath of the planet, they remind us that structure and mystery coexist. The Earth is full of places where the two meet, where reason and wonder overlap like ice and rock. Antarctica just happens to be the purest example, the most silent, the most patient. And as satellites continue their quiet orbits, sending back new images every day, the conversation goes on. Somewhere between data and dream, another shadow will emerge, another angle will seem too perfect, another headline will ask the same question. What if these aren't just mountains? What if there's more to see, more to know, more to uncover beneath all that white? The answers, like the continent itself, move slowly. They shift, they settle, they wait. But for now, the shapes in the snow keep their secret, unbothered by our fascination. They are both illusion and evidence depending on how you look. And as the world sleeps and the ice breathes, the black peaks keep rising through the white, silent witnesses to the oldest conversation we have ever had with our planet, the one that begins with wonder and never quite ends. If you could peel back the snow and ice layer by layer, the story of the land beneath Antarctica would read like a book written in the language of stone. Every fracture, every ridge, every dark edge visible from above is part of a conversation that has been going on for hundreds of millions of years. The pyramidal peaks that stirred so much imagination are only the surface punctuation of that story. Beneath them lies the grammar of the earth itself, slow, deliberate, and relentless. Time here doesn't move in seconds or centuries, it moves in weight. The ice above Antarctica is not just a covering, it's a force, a continent of its own pressing down on rock with the weight of mountains. In some places, the ice is nearly 3 miles thick. That's not an exaggeration. The pressure at those depths is enough to reshape the crust, bending and sinking it slightly under the load. Geologists call this isostatic depression, the land physically pushed downward by the sheer mass of frozen water. It means that Antarctica, for all its apparent stillness, is always flexing. When ice melts or builds up, the stone beneath it shifts, groaning under the slow rhythm of climate. That's why the shapes we see, the sharp ridges, the dark peaks, the formations that seem almost intentional, are never static. They are products of pressure and patience. The glaciers act like sculptors, carving valleys and scraping surfaces with grains of rock embedded in their frozen bodies. Over time, that movement polishes some areas and shatters others. What looks like a straight line could be a fracture smoothed by ice. What appears to be a perfect angle could be two ancient valleys intersecting just so. When sunlight and shadow do their part, the illusion of design emerges. The ice doesn't just shape the land, it hides it. More than 90% of Antarctica's bedrock is invisible to human eyes. The continent we imagine, flat, white, featureless, is a mask. Underneath lies one of the most complex landscapes on Earth, carved by forces that predate humanity by hundreds of millions of years. Scientists know this not from sight but from sound. They use radar, bouncing waves off the hidden ground and listening to the echoes that come back. From those echoes they build maps, digital reliefs of a world no one has ever seen. When they first did this, in the mid-20th century, they found something astonishing. Beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet lies the Gamburtsev subglacial mountains, an entire range the size of the Alps, invisible under ice. Its peaks rise thousands of meters, its valleys plunge deep enough to hold rivers and lakes, yet it has been sealed off since before the first humans existed. It's one of the great geological mysteries of our planet, how such a mountain range could form, survive, and remain hidden for so long. Some of its ridges bear uncanny resemblance to the shapes we see in those famous satellite images, and that makes sense. The same forces that sculpted the Gamburtsev range are at work across the continent, grinding, freezing, thawing, repeating. Over millions of years, this rhythm of ice and rock has created landscapes that look intentional, even when they're not. The sharp ridges scientists call arêtes, the pointed summits called horns, and the triangular peaks called pyramidal nunataks. All are born from the same slow process. When multiple glaciers flow around a central peak, each one carves a cirque, a bowl-shaped hollow. Where those cirques meet, they leave behind a pyramid-like point of untouched rock. The Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps is one of the most famous examples, and it formed the same way. Antarctica has hundreds, maybe thousands of them, most never seen except as faint markings under satellite snow glare. It's easy to see why such shapes fool the imagination. Nature, when given enough time, often produces forms that feel engineered. A coastline can look like a face. A mountain can look like a monument. The difference between artifice and geology is often just scale and intention. But the Earth doesn't need intention to create beauty. It has patience, and patience achieves the same effect. Every ridge and valley in Antarctica is the result of countless freeze-thaw cycles, each one expanding tiny cracks in the rock. Water seeps in, freezes, expands, and over millions of years stone yields to repetition. The slowest process on Earth ends up creating the sharpest lines. That's the paradox of the Antarctic landscape. It looks young, almost freshly carved, yet it's unimaginably old. The ice sheet itself is ancient, but not permanent. It's grown and receded many times over geological history. Each advance grinds away at the land. Each retreat reveals a new version of the same terrain, slightly altered, slightly rearranged. If you could watch it in time-lapse over millions of years, the mountains would seem to breathe. Peaks rise, valleys widen, shadows shift. The continent remakes itself again and again, erasing and redrawing its own contours. And yet, through all that change, some features persist. Certain peaks have been exposed for so long that they've developed dark surfaces from wind-blown dust and microscopic organisms, simple life forms that cling to rock even in sub-zero temperatures. These tiny patches of darkness absorb sunlight and stand out starkly against the white ice around them. From the air, they appear as black triangles, uncanny in their precision. To a satellite, they might look like entrances or markers. To geology, they're simply the fingerprints of endurance. When you think about it, the idea of a pyramid buried in ice isn't so strange. The Earth itself builds pyramids constantly, just not for the reasons we imagine. The laws of physics favour certain forms. Triangular slopes are the most stable under pressure. Whether it's a mountain or a sand dune, the shape repeats. Gravity demands it. Erosion enforces it. And over time, everything that stands tall eventually takes on that same tapering geometry. It's a kind of universal design, written not by architects, but by the quiet persistence of natural law. Still, the story of these Antarctic shapes wouldn't hold our attention if it were only about geology. What makes it linger is the combination of logic and mystery, fact and longing. We can understand perfectly well how ice sculpts rock, yet the moment we see symmetry, something inside us hesitates. Because symmetry suggests purpose, and purpose suggests meaning. It's not that we reject science, it's that we want the world to feel like it's speaking to us. A random mountain feels cold. A pyramid, even one made by chance, feels like a message. The patience of stone is something humans rarely experience directly. Our lives are too brief to notice its pace. When we build, we measure in years, maybe centuries. The Earth measures in millions. To it, we are the passing weather. Momentary, loud, soon gone. The rocks beneath Antarctica have been shifting since before there were eyes to see them. They have watched continents drift, climates reverse, and entire ecosystems come and go. That's why the idea of something human beneath all that feels so improbable. The timescales don't match. The patience of stone is absolute. Civilization, by comparison, is a flicker. Still, the ice has a way of keeping everything equal. It preserves without preference. A meteorite and a human artifact would both survive the same way. Encased, compressed, silent. The oldest meteorites on Earth have been found in Antarctica for this reason. The ice acts like a natural conveyor, moving debris slowly toward the surface where it can be collected. Some have been buried for hundreds of thousands of years, preserved so perfectly that they look newly fallen. When explorers find them, they're holding pieces of the solar system's beginning. The idea that something else, something made by us or by another intelligence, could also lie hidden there isn't absurd, it's just unproven. Every discovery in Antarctica begins as a disturbance in data, a spike in radar return, a magnetic anomaly, a strange shape on a map. Most of them turn out to be ordinary, but not all. Under the ice, scientists have found entire networks of lakes connected by channels. They've found regions where heat seeps upward from volcanic activity, melting ice from below. They've even found mountains that seem to be older than the continent itself, relics from before Antarctica drifted to its current position. The more they uncover, the clearer it becomes that this frozen world is not static. It's dynamic, layered, alive with slow movement. That movement is what keeps the mystery alive. A formation visible one year might disappear the next, buried under new snow or shifting ice. What we think of as a stable landscape is actually fluid, changing shape as the ice flows like an impossibly slow river. Over centuries, a mountain can migrate, not by moving itself, but by the ice carrying its shadow elsewhere. It's a reminder that what we see from above, the dark triangles, the clean edges, is only a momentary glimpse of an ongoing process. The next generation of satellites will look down and see something slightly different, and the debate will begin again. If there's one lesson to take from the patience of stone and the weight of ice, it's that the Earth doesn't rush. Its processes are vast, indifferent to our timelines. When we speak of pyramids and lost civilizations, we're really speaking of ourselves, of how quickly we build and how easily we forget. The planet doesn't forget. It recycles, it compresses, it preserves. The ice sheet is not hiding something from us. It's holding it, waiting until the time is right for it to be seen again. So the peaks remain, caught between geology and myth. They are the visible breath of a world that has been sculpting itself long before we could imagine sculptors. If the ice could speak, it might tell us that beauty doesn't need intention, that a million years of patience can create what looks like precision. That time, more than any tool, is the true artist. And as the wind drifts across those ridges, carrying grains of snow from one slope to another, it adds another thin layer to the story, another page in a book that will outlast us. The weight of ice presses down, the stone endures, and somewhere far above, another satellite passes silently, capturing yet another image that will spark yet another question. It's a cycle as natural as erosion itself, wonder eroded by explanation, then rebuilt by curiosity. And so the patience of stone continues, shaping both the landscape and the mind that tries to understand it. Far beneath that frozen surface, where light never reaches and heat struggles to escape, the crust keeps shifting in microscopic increments. Each movement is an echo of forces older than language, older than memory. The rocks bear the weight, the ice keeps the secret, and we keep listening for something that might never answer. Yet the silence itself is enough, because even if we never uncover a single artifact or hidden structure, the act of looking, of imagining, keeps us connected to the oldest truth of all, that the Earth, in its quiet persistence, will always build wonders greater than anything we could design, simply by waiting long enough. And above all that weight, under the pale, unbroken sky, those black peaks remain visible, patient and unbothered by the stories they inspire. The ice will cover them again someday, and uncover them again after that, repeating the cycle without hurry. It doesn't matter to the mountains whether they are called pyramids or peaks. They exist in a time scale that makes such distinctions meaningless. What matters is that they endure, holding their shape while the rest of the world rushes by. And maybe in that endurance lies the quiet answer to the question that started it all. Not what the pyramids are, but why we needed them to exist in the first place. When people began to imagine pyramids under the ice, they didn't just see shapes in the snow. They saw echoes of something older, something that reached past history and into the fog of human origins. The idea that Antarctica might have once been home to a civilization isn't new. Versions of that story have drifted through myths, esoteric texts, and speculative theories for decades. They all share the same heartbeat, the belief that humanity's story is longer, stranger, and far less complete than we've been taught. The continent at the bottom of the world has become the perfect screen for those projections, because it is the one place left where the past can still hide. When the first rumours of the Antarctic pyramids spread, the internet revived a set of ideas that had been dormant for nearly a century. The most famous was the tale of Atlantis, not the glittering utopia of crystal cities and impossible technologies often described in fiction, but the version told by Plato more than 2,000 years ago. He spoke of an advanced island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules, destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. Many took that as allegory, but some have searched ever since for the real place behind the metaphor. Theorists have placed it everywhere: the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the Sahara, even Antarctica. The thought goes that if the continent was once ice-free, it could have been the perfect cradle for a civilization that vanished when the world changed. That version of history might sound romantic, even fantastical, but it taps into something older than any map: the human instinct to look backward and sense something missing. Civilizations rise and fall, their remains swallowed by jungle, sea or sand. We know this from ruins rediscovered long after their builders were gone. Troy, long thought to be myth, turned out to be real. The Indus Valley cities lay buried for thousands of years before anyone knew they existed. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey forced archaeologists to rewrite their understanding of when complex societies began. It was built more than 11,000 years ago, before agriculture, before writing, before cities were supposed to exist. If such places could be forgotten on dry land, why not under ice? The Antarctic hypothesis often points to an old, controversial map as evidence. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who compiled it from older sources. Parts of it seem to depict the coastlines of South America and, intriguingly, a southern continent resembling Antarctica. The striking claim is that it shows that continent without ice, as if copied from charts made when the land was still temperate. Mainstream historians argue that the map simply misrepresents South America's lower coast, stretched by projection errors common to early cartography. But for those who believe in a forgotten age of civilization, the map is a relic of memory, proof that someone long before us knew what lay at the end of the world. Then came the 20th century, when Antarctica became the stage for both science and speculation. As nations raced to claim parts of it for research, others imagined secret histories unfolding there. During and after World War II, stories spread of expeditions that found hidden structures or tunnels beneath the ice. Most of these tales had little evidence behind them, but they fed into a larger cultural appetite for mystery. By the time the satellite images appeared in the 21st century, the groundwork had already been laid. People were ready to believe that something extraordinary could be waiting beneath all that white. The notion of ancient Antarctic civilizations often borrows from patterns we see elsewhere. Pyramids aligned with stars, monoliths carved with astronomical precision, myths describing floods or cosmic visitors. It's tempting to link them. The Egyptians, the Mayans, the builders of Teotihuacan, the architects of Angkor Wat, all separated by oceans, all constructing monumental structures with striking similarities. The logic goes that they must have shared a common origin, a mother civilization that taught geometry, astronomy, and architecture before vanishing into legend. Antarctica, with its ancient mystery and perfect inaccessibility, became the ideal candidate. But the archaeological record tells a different story, one that's slower, humbler, and in its own way more astonishing. The pyramid, for example, is not a universal code passed down from one source. It's an inevitable solution to a problem: how to build high using materials that can't yet support vertical walls. A pyramid shape distributes weight evenly. Sandstone, adobe, or brick, all prone to collapse under stress, naturally form tapered structures when stacked. Across the world, early builders discovered this through trial and error. The form repeated itself not because of shared ancestry, but because gravity and physics are the same everywhere. The result looks like coordination when it's actually parallel invention. The same applies to myths. Nearly every culture tells stories of floods, heroes, gods, and lost lands. Water, in particular, plays a central role, a force of creation and destruction. But that's because water is universal. Civilizations grew near rivers and coasts. Floods shaped their lives. When the Ice Age ended and the oceans rose, those floods were real. Entire land bridges vanished. Coastal plains became sea floors and people were displaced. Their memories passed into legend, embellished over generations. Myths, like mountains, form slowly, layer by layer, shaped by both truth and imagination. Still, even with all the science, there's something magnetic about the idea of civilizations that never were. It speaks to our sense of incompleteness, that our species might have a prehistory deeper than we realize. The last ice age ended about 12,000 years ago, an instant in geological time but long enough to erase almost all traces of any coastal culture. If people lived along shorelines now buried under the sea, their remains would be difficult to find. The continents have shifted, the sediment has moved, and the ocean has rewritten the map again and again. If we missed one civilization, how sure can we be that there weren't others? That's where the myth of Antarctica's lost builders draws its strength. It's not really about pyramids or ice. It's about our uneasy relationship with knowledge, what we know, what we guess, and what we long to be true. In that sense, the legend serves a purpose. It keeps curiosity alive. It reminds scientists that the story of humanity is not finished, and reminds dreamers that mystery still has room to breathe. The balance between those two groups, the ones who measure and the ones who imagine, has always driven discovery. From a geological standpoint, we know that Antarctica's last ice-free period predates modern humans. The continent's warmest age, when forests and dinosaurs thrived, ended tens of millions of years before our species appeared. But it also had periods of relative warmth much later, during interglacial cycles when coastal regions might have been ice-free for short times. If humans or their ancestors ever reached that far south, there would be traces, tools, bones, carvings. None have been found. The absence of evidence, of course, never satisfies those who suspect a cover-up or a deeper story. But the reality is simpler. Antarctica is enormous, and we've barely touched its surface. Even now, most of the research bases occupy small coastal zones. The interior remains almost entirely unvisited. Logistics alone make exploration nearly impossible. Temperatures drop below -80 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds can reach 200 miles per hour. Machinery freezes and fuel crystallizes. The ice itself moves, closing crevasses one year and opening new ones the next. Under those conditions, the idea that an ancient civilization could have left behind grand monuments becomes harder to sustain. Stone crumbles, metal corrodes, and the ice grinds everything down. Even the tallest structures would vanish under accumulation. Within a few thousand years, the evidence would be indistinguishable from natural rock. But even if the physical possibility is small, the psychological power is immense. Ancient civilizations are more than historical curiosities. They're mirrors. Every time we imagine one, we project our own anxieties and hopes onto it. In the 19th century, Victorians obsessed over lost continents because they mirrored their own colonial ambitions, the desire to find, claim, and explain. In the 20th century, post-war fascination with Atlantis and ancient astronauts reflected uncertainty about technology and human origins. Today, our myths have shifted again. We look to Antarctica because it's the last place untouched by modern life, a refuge for the unknown in an age of surveillance and satellites. The story evolves, adapting to new fears and new dreams. Some modern interpretations suggest not a human civilization, but a pre-human one, a species older, perhaps more advanced, erased by catastrophe. Others link the pyramids to visitors from elsewhere, beings who seeded life or knowledge on Earth and left signs for us to rediscover. These ideas drift easily between science fiction and pseudoscience, yet they reveal a consistent pattern, a longing for continuity, for the sense that our existence fits into something larger. The pyramid becomes a symbol, not of stone, but of connection. Meanwhile, the real work of uncovering the human past continues quietly. Archaeologists dig into riverbanks, deserts, and caves, piecing together fragments of our story that are both ordinary and extraordinary. Each discovery, whether it's a tool, a bone, or a shard of pottery, adds to a tapestry far more intricate than any single myth. It turns out we don't need lost continents to make our history miraculous. The fact that humans survived ice ages, crossed oceans, and built societies from almost nothing is wonder enough. Still, there's no harm in wondering what else might be waiting. The Earth is vast, and much of it still unexplored beneath soil, sea, and ice. Submerged ruins off the coasts of India and Japan hint at settlements swallowed by rising seas. In Siberia, entire river valleys hide beneath permafrost, containing fossils and possibly human traces from forgotten migrations. The story of our species keeps expanding, and every discovery feels like an echo of the same question. How far back does memory go? Perhaps the legends of Antarctica are part of that same process. Memory stretched across time, distorted by retelling. If early explorers glimpsed strange shapes through fog and snow, their minds might have filled the gaps with images of familiar monuments. If ancient mapmakers heard rumours of land in the south, they might have drawn what they knew. Pyramids, temples, cities, extending imagination into the unknown. Over centuries, those fragments merged into a myth, and now the myth circles back, reshaped by digital images and global curiosity. The story of the first civilizations that never were is not one of deception, but of desire. Desire for meaning, for origins, for proof that we belong to a lineage older than we can prove. In that sense, the myth itself becomes part of our cultural archaeology. It tells future historians what we believed in, what we feared losing, and how we made sense of a world that still feels too large. If someday explorers dig through miles of Antarctic ice and find nothing but rock and fossils, it won't make the story less valuable. Myths have a way of teaching us even when they're wrong. They show us how the human mind reaches for connection when faced with isolation, how it builds civilization in imagination before it can build one in stone. The pyramids of Antarctica, real or imagined, serve that purpose perfectly. They stand at the intersection of science and story, reminding us that both exist to explore the unknown. And somewhere under all that ice, whether it hides only ancient rock or something more, the Earth continues its slow work, storing its history layer by layer. The first civilizations that never were may not have left ruins, but they've left a question that refuses to fade, a question about who we were and who we might have been if the world had unfolded differently. The wind still crosses those peaks, the satellites still pass overhead, and each shadow that falls on the snow looks a little like a memory we almost remember. The white remains unbroken, but imagination keeps drawing lines beneath it, tracing cities that might have been, stories that might still be sleeping under the ice. And so, the mystery drifts on, patient and endless, carried forward not by evidence, but by the same quiet force that shaped the first myths of fire, flood and stars, the human need to wonder what came before the beginning. When we talk about what might lie beneath Antarctica, we usually begin with the ice. We picture the frozen peaks, the white plains, the black pyramids, the quiet that feels almost alive. But to understand what could possibly rest under all that, we have to go back before the cold, before the first snowfall ever touched that continent, before even the world itself looked like the one we know. We have to go back to a memory older than maps, the time when Antarctica was not a desert of ice, but a living landscape, green and warm, breathing under a different sky. The Earth, as it exists now, is only one of its many versions. It has remade itself countless times, shifting its continents like puzzle pieces and rewriting its own climate. Antarctica, though we now imagine it as barren, once sat near the equator. 200 million years ago, it was part of a vast supercontinent called Gondwana, a single massive landmass that also included South America, Africa, India, and Australia. It was covered in forests then, thick and damp, filled with ferns taller than houses and trees that never saw winter. Rivers moved slowly through lowlands, and the air was heavy with humidity. There were insects the size of birds, amphibians that crawled between roots, and the first reptiles beginning to rule the land. That version of Antarctica was not silent. It buzzed, roared, and shimmered with life. Even then, it was not frozen at the bottom of the world, but anchored near the centre of a planet still young enough to surprise itself. Over millions of years, Gondwana began to break apart. Its fragments drifted in slow motion, carried by the churning mantle beneath the crust. Africa and South America slid west. India began its long journey north toward Asia. Australia peeled away like a slow-moving ship. And the piece that would become Antarctica started its journey southward, carried across latitudes, gradually slipping from sunlight into the long cold shadow of the pole. That movement didn't happen overnight. It took tens of millions of years, an incomprehensible span during which life adapted to each new temperature, each new angle of sunlight. As Antarctica drifted, its forests persisted. Even when it reached higher latitudes, it wasn't immediately buried in ice. Fossils tell us that about 50 million years ago, the land was still covered in dense vegetation, conifers, beech trees, and even flowering plants. The air was mild and the seas around it teemed with life. Fossilized leaves found deep beneath the ice still bear the structure of veins that once carried sap. Wood fragments show growth rings, proof that these trees experienced seasonal changes. It's strange to imagine forests in a place where today the wind never stops howling, but the earth remembers. It keeps those imprints sealed away like pressed pages in an ancient book. Scientists have drilled deep into Antarctic ice and sediment to uncover these memories. They found pollen grains, fossilized roots, and even traces of ancient soils buried under kilometers of ice. Each fragment is a whisper from a forgotten world, telling us that the land we now call lifeless once knew colour, sound, and warmth. When researchers reconstructed the ancient climate, they found that average temperatures along the coast could have been around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, mild enough for forests to thrive. There were rivers flowing freely, rain falling in cycles, and a sky filled not with endless cloud, but sunlight diffused through the long southern air. If a traveller from that era could walk across what would one day become the South Pole, they would find no ice at all. They might find giant amphibians basking on muddy shores, primitive birds calling from tree canopies, and insects darting through ferns taller than any human. The land was alive, and in that life the ground we now call lost was simply ordinary. What we think of as desolation was once home to ecosystems as rich as any jungle. But nothing on Earth stays fixed. About 34 million years ago the world began to cool. Atmospheric carbon dioxide dropped, triggering a shift that changed everything. Ice first appeared along the mountain ranges, then crept outward. Over millions of years, glaciers advanced and merged, forming what we now call the Antarctic ice sheet. The forest withered and disappeared, the rivers froze and the land fell silent. It wasn't a single event but a slow retreat, a long farewell between life and warmth, and as the ice spread, it buried that memory completely. For scientists, uncovering that ancient world is a kind of detective work. Each ice core and sediment layer is a clue, each isotope a sentence in a language we're still learning to read. The deeper they go, the farther back the story stretches. Some of the carbon trapped in Antarctic rock is the residue of plants that photosynthesized tens of millions of years ago. Their molecules still hold the imprint of sunlight filtered through ancient air. That's how we know the past, not just in theory, but in chemical fact. The fingerprints of warmth preserved under the weight of frozen time. If there had been humans, or anything remotely human, living during that age, they would have seen a world almost unrecognizable. Continents sat in different places, oceans flowed along altered paths, and the climate was unstable, cycling between hothouse and icehouse conditions. But even though there were no people then, the planet was already creating the landscapes that would one day shape our imagination. Volcanoes rose and fell, glaciers carved valleys, and sediments layered themselves into future mysteries. Antarctica was laying down its foundation for the legends that would come millions of years later, long before there was anyone to tell them. Some researchers have even found evidence that Antarctica might have briefly thawed again, much more recently, perhaps as little as a few million years ago. Sediments taken from the seafloor off its coast show signs of freshwater input and pollen that could only have come from land-based plants. That means that during warmer interglacial periods, parts of the continent may have been ice-free once more. If that's true, then for short intervals it wasn't the frozen wilderness we know, but a place with open lakes, moss, and maybe even patches of grass. Life, persistent as always, might have returned, if only for a while. That possibility deepens the mystery. It reminds us that the Earth doesn't remember in straight lines. Its memory is circular, looping through cycles of warmth and cold, creation and erasure. The world that froze over wasn't destroyed, it was archived. Every layer of ice is a file, every trapped bubble a sentence, every buried leaf a record of light and water and air. The difference between a myth and a memory is often just accessibility. Antarctica's history isn't hidden because it's secret, it's hidden because we can't reach it yet. And yet, the imagination doesn't need access to make meaning. Long before scientists began drilling, ancient cultures already spoke of lands that disappeared beneath waves or ice. They didn't know about plate tectonics or orbital cycles, but they sensed change. They watched coastlines shift, climates alter, stars move slightly from generation to generation. The stories they told of golden ages lost, of frozen realms at the world's edge, may have been attempts to preserve those observations in mythic form. It's not impossible that memories of real events, the end of the Ice Age, the flooding of ancient lands, were passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years, becoming symbols rather than records. In that sense, the story of Antarctica's hidden world might be humanity's attempt to connect its own fragile timeline to the planet's deeper one. When we imagine ancient civilizations under the ice, we're not just speculating about lost architecture. We're yearning to close a gap between human time and Earth time. Maps only show what we know. Before them, memory filled the void. The people who first mapped their own small worlds, rivers, stars, coastlines, did so to make sense of change. But the Earth itself doesn't need maps. It carries its own record, etched into stone and fossil and ice. That's why scientists often describe their work in Antarctica as reading a memory, one too vast and too slow for a single lifetime to grasp. What fascinates them most is how delicate that memory is. Ice preserves perfectly, but it can also erase perfectly. A single warming cycle can melt away hundreds of thousands of years of record. Each core they extract is a fragile thread in the fabric of planetary history. They handle them carefully, knowing that once exposed to warmth, those ancient bubbles of air, the last breath of a vanished forest or sea, will vanish forever. In those samples, they found traces of ancient carbon levels, evidence of tropical rainfall, even dust from deserts that no longer exist. The story written there is not of catastrophe, but of rhythm, an endless sequence of cooling and warming, growth and retreat. That rhythm is older than maps, older than measurement, older than us. It continues whether we're here to read it or not. When we see the black pyramids jutting from the snow, or the smooth expanse of ice stretching beyond the horizon, we're seeing the surface of that rhythm frozen mid-beat. Beneath it lies the pulse of the planet, slow and steady. If the ice could melt completely, if we could stand on the bare rock and see what's hidden beneath, we might find nothing more than valleys and mountains. But those would still be extraordinary because they are part of a landscape that remembers warmth. The ground itself would tell the story, the shape of old riverbeds, the pattern of soil once touched by roots. In those contours lies the memory of a living continent, a place that has existed in more forms than we can imagine. Perhaps that's why the myth of Antarctica's lost civilizations feels so powerful. It isn't just about mystery, it's about continuity. It suggests that even in the coldest, most remote place on Earth, the world has always been alive, changing, and remembering. When people talk about ancient builders or forgotten empires, what they're really expressing is awe at how much has come before and how much has been erased. Maps are temporary. They capture moments in human understanding, not the world itself. The Earth's version of a map is written in movement. Every time a continent drifts, every time a glacier carves a new path, it redraws its own lines. Antarctica is one of those lines still in motion, still shifting beneath its icy disguise. The ice we see today is not permanent. It will change again, as it has countless times before, and when it does, it may reveal more of its buried memory. Forests, lakes, fossils, perhaps even something we never thought to expect. In the meantime, it waits. The ice holds its secrets, the rock holds its patience, and we continue to wonder. The black peaks that rise through the snow are the punctuation marks of that long story, fragments of geology and imagination standing together. They remind us that memory doesn't always belong to consciousness. Sometimes it belongs to matter, to stone, to ice, to the slow persistence of the planet itself. And as satellites pass overhead, capturing more images of shapes and shadows, they're really recording glimmers of that memory, still active, still evolving. The idea of ancient Antarctica may never resolve into certainty, but it doesn't need to. Its power lies in the space between what we can prove and what we can feel. We sense, without needing evidence, that the world has known more than we do, that its past is layered, vast, and alive. That's what makes this continent so captivating. It's not just the mystery of what lies beneath the ice, but the recognition that the Earth itself remembers in ways we're only beginning to understand. It remembers forests where there is now emptiness, warmth where there is now frost, and life where we assume only silence. Every gust of wind across that frozen plain is a whisper from that older world, a faint echo of leaves, rivers and rain. And even though no map ever showed it clearly, that memory endures. It hides beneath miles of ice, waiting for another age, another warmth, another set of eyes. The snow above it keeps falling, each flake a new note in an ancient song, and the world keeps turning slowly, patiently, carrying its oldest story beneath a blanket of white. There was a time when the world was warm, not just the warm we know from summers and tropics, but a warmth that wrapped the entire planet like a gentle tide. The poles were not frozen. The seas reached far inland, and green stretched where white now reigns. It's hard to imagine looking at the modern Earth from space, the crisp outlines of continents, the glaring whites of polar caps, the blue that separates everything, that once there was no ice at all. The planet has worn many faces, and warmth was one of its most persistent expressions. For most of its long history, Earth has been a world of heat, rain, and motion, its surface pulsing with energy from within and from the sun. Antarctica, in that ancient era, was part of that rhythm. It was not a place of silence, but a crossroads of life. To understand how that warmth shaped everything, we have to step out of the human scale of time. We think of climate as something that changes over decades or centuries, but the Earth measures in millions of years. It breathes slowly. It shifts between warmth and cold in cycles so vast that even whole civilizations, if they existed, would appear and vanish between the peaks of temperature. When the planet tilted slightly, when volcanic activity surged, when ocean currents changed their course, the balance tipped. The line between warm and frozen moved, and the entire world rearranged itself. During the Eocene epoch, roughly 50 million years ago, the Earth was at one of its warmest points in the last 100 million years. It's hard to overstate how different it was. Palm trees grew near what is now Alaska. Crocodiles swam in rivers flowing through what would become the Arctic Circle. Antarctica, freshly separated from Australia, was still green. Fossilized pollen tells us that temperate forests covered its coasts and shallow lakes dotted its interior. The animals that lived there, small mammals, birds, and early versions of species that would later dominate other continents, thrived in a climate that stayed mild year-round. At that time, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere was several times higher than today. The planet was a greenhouse, trapping heat and distributing it evenly across latitudes. There were no ice caps, no frozen oceans, and sea levels were hundreds of feet higher. The continents looked familiar but carried entirely different ecosystems. Dinosaurs had been gone for millions of years, but life had filled every niche they left behind. Giant birds ruled the skies, forests of redwoods and beeches stretched from pole to pole. Insects flourished in densities we can barely imagine, pollinating the vast web of plant life that fed everything else. The air itself was different, denser with moisture, thicker with pollen, filled with a soft haze from vegetation and volcanic gases. The earth smelled alive, of soil, water, and decay. It was not the sterile silence we associate with Antarctica now. It was a warm pulse, a constant exchange of energy between life and its environment. Fossils from that period show leaves with broad shapes, adapted for absorbing sunlight that was abundant but diffused through constant cloud cover. That detail matters. It tells us that even at the poles, sunlight was strong enough, regular enough, to sustain entire ecosystems. The world had found a balance in warmth. But balance never lasts. The planet's warmth is both a gift and a warning. It supports life, but it also carries instability. Heat drives storms, melts ice, shifts currents. Over millions of years, the world began to cool again. Tectonic plates moved slowly into new configurations. When Antarctica and South America finally drifted apart about 34 million years ago, the Drake Passage opened, a narrow but crucial channel that allowed cold ocean water to circulate freely around the southern pole. That circulation, known today as the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, isolated the continent thermally. It stopped warm water from reaching it, and the cooling accelerated. Slowly the first glaciers appeared. Even then, the world resisted freezing completely. It clung to warmth like a memory. Pockets of forest survived for millions of years more, growing smaller and more stunted as the ice expanded. Sediment cores from the Antarctic seabed contain traces of pollen from those final forests, evidence that even as the continent grew cold, life held on. When the last of those trees died, they left behind their signatures in the soil, microscopic markers that still tell their story today. The shift from warmth to cold wasn't uniform. The planet cooled unevenly, swinging between phases of ice and interglacial reprieve. When the warmth returned, it did so in pulses, brief but intense. About 15 million years ago, Antarctica experienced one of those pulses, a temporary thaw. The ice retreated from the coasts, revealing valleys that had not seen the sun in millions of years. Meltwater carved channels through ancient rock. Some parts of the continent may have even hosted small tundra ecosystems again. Mosses, lichens, and tiny flowering plants clinging to meltwater streams. For a time, the world remembered what it was like to breathe freely. We know this from the clues left behind: isotopic signatures in marine fossils, chemical ratios in ice cores, layers of sediment that alternate between cold and warm periods. Each layer is like a heartbeat, a record of the Earth's shifting temperature. The rhythm is long and slow but unmistakable. The planet warms, it cools, it warms again. Each cycle erases parts of the last but leaves just enough behind for us to read. The warmth we experience now is not new. It's a return, part of a pattern that predates us by far. When scientists analyse those cycles, they look at three main factors: the composition of the atmosphere, the orbit of the planet, and the arrangement of the continents. The first controls how much heat the planet traps, the second determines how sunlight is distributed, and the third influences ocean currents that move heat around the globe. These three forces interact constantly, producing climates that range from global hothouses to ice ages. Antarctica, sitting at the southern pole, is both a result and a regulator of these changes. When it is ice-free, the planet warms. When it's frozen, the world cools. It acts like the Earth's thermostat, though one that responds not in years or centuries, but in eons. When the world was warm, life adapted in ways that seem almost alien to us now. Species thrived in conditions we would find impossible. Plants developed leaves and bark to resist constant heat. Marine life adjusted to oceans that were more acidic, richer in nutrients, and far warmer than today's. Coral reefs spread into regions where they can no longer exist. Even the poles, though far from the equator, hosted ecosystems of their own. Fossilized remains of amphibians, freshwater fish, and even small mammals have been found within what is now the frozen interior of Antarctica. Each of them is a fragment of proof that warmth once reached everywhere, and yet, for all that abundance, the warm Earth was also fragile. Ecosystems lived on the edge of balance. When carbon levels shifted too quickly, when volcanic activity spiked or an asteroid struck, the system crashed. Extinction swept across the globe, followed by slow recoveries. The planet always rebuilt itself, but never in the same way twice. That's the deeper truth scientists read in the rocks and ice. The world endures, but it does not stay the same. Its warmth comes and goes like a long breath, each exhale erasing and remaking the face of the planet. The idea that Antarctica was once warm enough to host forests and animals unsettles many people because it challenges our mental map of permanence. We like to think of the continents as fixed, their climates as predictable, their roles as stable. But the Earth is restless. Its heat moves from core to surface, its crust slides, its tilt wobbles. What is frozen today was once fertile. What is tropical now may one day lie under ice. The maps we draw are only temporary agreements between us and time. That instability might explain why the idea of hidden civilizations, even in a place like Antarctica, continues to feel plausible to so many. If the planet can change so completely, if warmth and cold can trade places, then maybe entire worlds can come and go without leaving much behind. We know of species that existed for millions of years and vanished almost without trace. Why not cultures, if any had time to rise before erasure? The evidence says no, but the imagination says maybe. And between those two, there's a space that will always belong to wonder. When scientists drill deep into the ice, they aren't just studying temperature or chemistry, they're studying memory. Each trapped bubble of gas tells them how the atmosphere once felt. The ratio of oxygen isotopes in those bubbles reveals how warm the air was when that snow first fell. The deeper the ice, the older the air. Near the bottom of the cores, they're sampling atmospheres that last existed long before humans evolved. Air from epochs when forests still covered the southern pole. In those samples, they've found traces of plant pollen, dust from distant deserts, even microscopic salt crystals from ancient seas. The planet keeps its own archives better than any library we could build. Every few years, when global temperatures rise or ice melts faster than expected, people speak of the planet returning to a state it once knew. In a way, that's true. The world has been warm before, but the difference now is speed. Natural warmth unfolds over millennia. The warmth of our age is arriving in decades. The Earth adapts, but not always gently. The last time Antarctica melted significantly, sea levels rose enough to reshape coastlines across the world. If that process repeated now, it would redraw every map we rely on. The past warmth is both a memory and a warning, a story of what happens when balance gives way to motion. Still, there's something reassuring about knowing that warmth is not an anomaly, but part of the planet's character. It reminds us that the Earth is not fragile, it's flexible. It survives its own transformations. It has endured meteor impacts, volcanic winters, runaway heat, and endless rearrangements. The life that fills it adapts, rebuilds, and begins again. The warmth that once bathed Antarctica may return someday, in another cycle, under another sky. Forests may grow again where glaciers stand. Rivers may cut through valleys long buried in ice. The same sunlight that once filtered through prehistoric leaves still shines now, waiting for the world to tilt back toward it. Somewhere in that future warmth, the black peaks we see today might stand again in open air, surrounded not by snow but by soil and water. The shapes we call pyramids might once more overlook living ground. The ice would release its pressure, and the land beneath would rise slightly. A geological sigh of relief after millions of years underweight. In that landscape, the evidence of this age, the satellites, the stations, the machines, might be long gone. Only the mountains would remain, their patience rewarded by another era of sunlight. When scientists simulate those possible futures, they're not guessing wildly. They use data drawn from the planet's own history, the cycles of warmth that have come and gone countless times. The equations that describe those rhythms are elegant, but they all point to the same truth. Warmth and cold are partners, not enemies. Each gives meaning to the other. Without ice, we wouldn't notice heat. Without warmth, we wouldn't understand cold. The balance shifts endlessly, and our species just happens to be living during one of its brief transitions. It's strange, then, to think that the world we call extreme today is actually a quiet phase compared to its past. The warm Earth was wilder, wetter, louder. Volcanoes erupted constantly. Monsoons circled the globe. Lightning flashed across forests that no longer exist. The energy of that world shaped the minerals, the mountains, the soils we now stand on. Even the oil and gas buried deep underground, the fuels that drive our civilization, are the compressed remains of that long age of warmth. We're literally burning the memory of that world to power our own. And perhaps that's the unspoken connection between the past and present. That our curiosity about ancient warmth comes from somewhere deeper than science. It's a recognition that the planet's story is also our own. We live on the leftovers of its earlier selves. Every breath of oxygen was once released by ancient forests. Every grain of soil comes from rocks weathered in climates long gone. The warmth that once enveloped the world never really left. It's stored in the planet's crust, in the chemical bonds of the atmosphere, in the cycles that keep turning even when we forget to notice. When the world was warm, the boundaries between places blurred. The polar regions were not barriers but gateways. Ocean currents moved freely, carrying nutrients and heat from one hemisphere to another. That global circulation fed ecosystems from pole to pole. It created balance through movement. Today, when we look at Antarctica, we see stillness. But underneath, the same principles apply. The ice flows, the water circulates, the earth breathes. The difference is only temperature. The process, the rhythm, remains unchanged. And maybe that's the quiet lesson buried in all the myths about lost worlds under ice. Not that we once had a paradise we've forgotten, but that paradise itself is temporary. Warmth comes and goes. Life fills the gaps, retreats, and returns again. The earth doesn't mourn what it loses. It transforms. It records, layer by layer, every change, every season, every pulse of heat. When we speak of hidden civilizations, of forgotten ages, of the secrets of the ice, we're really speaking about that memory. The one that never dies, only shifts form. Somewhere beneath those miles of frozen history lies the trace of that ancient warmth. In the structure of the rock, in the chemistry of the ice, in the quiet persistence of the microbes that still live there, it remains. The world remembers what it was like to be alive from pole to pole. It may one day remember again. Until then, the warmth lingers in potential, stored, patient, waiting beneath the white. When we look at shapes in the snow or outlines in stone or shadows on a screen, we're really seeing ourselves. Every pattern we recognize in the world is, in a way, a reflection of how our minds work. We are creatures built for meaning. From the first moment our ancestors looked up at the night sky, we have been connecting dots, turning stars into hunters, fish, lions, gods. We draw invisible lines between random points and call them constellations. We find faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, messages in static. That ability to see order in chaos helped us survive. It let us recognize danger, track prey, predict seasons. But it also left us with a habit we've never outgrown, the tendency to see intention where there is only accident. The pyramids of Antarctica, real or imagined, fit perfectly into that habit. The human mind is drawn to symmetry. We associate it with design, with care, with purpose. A mountain shaped like a pyramid can feel deliberate, even when it's nothing more than the slow, impartial work of geology. We can't help it. To us, geometry feels intelligent. Straight lines, right angles, proportions. These are the fingerprints of our own species. When we find them in nature, we assume someone must have made them. But often, nature and time are capable of creating the same illusion, just on a scale and timeline too vast for us to easily accept. That's the essence of the human pattern, the compulsion to fill every gap with meaning. When faced with the unknown, we invent a narrative, not to deceive ourselves, but to stay oriented. The world is too big, too complex, too indifferent for our minds to bear without a story to hold it together. Myths, science, and even the small details of daily life all spring from that same instinct. The Antarctic pyramids are a perfect mirror for it. They exist at the edge of knowledge, clear enough to provoke curiosity, distant enough to resist explanation, and in that space, our imagination rushes in. Psychologists call it apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections and patterns in unrelated things. It's not a flaw, it's a feature of human cognition. Without it, we couldn't invent, create, or explore. Our ancestors survived because they could notice patterns in animal tracks, in weather, in stars. They saw meaning before they could prove it. Every scientific discovery begins that way, with someone noticing something strange and asking why. The difference between myth and science is not the impulse, but the method that follows. Science demands evidence. Myth is content with feeling. Both start with wonder. It's worth remembering that the same mental wiring that gives us art and mathematics also gives us conspiracy theories and ghost stories. The mind doesn't discriminate between useful and useless patterns at first. It just searches. It's up to reason to decide which ones to keep. The pyramids in Antarctica, then, are not only geological formations or speculative monuments. They're psychological landscapes, projections of how we think. The story isn't really about ice or stone. It's about what we see when we look at something we don't understand. Even scientists are not immune to this patterning instinct. The first astronomers who mapped Mars saw straight lines and called them canals, convinced that intelligent life had built them. The lines were optical illusions created by the eye connecting faint features into order. But the idea persisted because it was elegant, a world like ours, with builders and planners and purpose. The Antarctic pyramid theory follows the same shape. Sharp lines in a blurry image become architecture. Shadows become evidence. Imagination builds structure on top of uncertainty until it feels solid enough to believe. This is not a failure of logic. It's a consequence of being human. We are meaning-making machines. Our brains use patterns to predict and understand the world, to anticipate outcomes and find safety. But when that system operates without enough data, it still does its job. It fills in the blanks. When explorers stare at endless white, their minds assemble familiar shapes. When satellite images reveal strange forms, we reach for familiar words: pyramid, city, temple. We give names because names make things manageable. The unknown becomes less frightening when it's labelled, even incorrectly. That instinct also explains why civilizations across the world have built structures that look so similar. The pyramid, the circle, the spiral. These forms appear again and again because they feel natural to the human mind and hand. A pyramid in particular is both simple and profound. It's stable, efficient, and reaches upward. You can build one from stone, sand, or clay without advanced tools. It endures. That's why it appears in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in China, and even in pre-Columbian North America. The form is universal not because knowledge was shared, but because the human pattern is universal. We are drawn to shapes that balance earth and sky, weight and height, permanence and aspiration. When people see pyramid-like peaks in Antarctica, they're not just seeing geometry in nature. They're recognizing something familiar, the echo of their own creations. The same instinct that once made us stack stones into mounds and monuments now makes us see monuments in mountains. It's a form of emotional recognition, a kind of mirror. The earth, through erosion and time, builds what we build, and we, through imagination, give it back intention. It's fascinating how much of human culture arises from this interplay between perception and projection. The constellations in the sky, for example, are pure invention. The stars are nowhere near each other in reality. They just appear close from our perspective. But once the patterns were drawn, they became permanent in our minds. We built entire mythologies around them, navigated oceans by them, tracked seasons through their movements. The same could be said for the patterns we see in geography. The lines of mountains, the bends of rivers, the faces we swear are carved in cliffs. These aren't lies. They're human collaborations with the landscape. When scientists map Antarctica today, they're engaging in the same collaboration, just with better tools. Radar, sonar, and satellite imaging are new ways of finding patterns, lines, shapes, changes in texture or colour that might reveal something hidden. The process is methodical, but the curiosity behind it is ancient. Every discovery, from the first compass to the first telescope, comes from the same drive, the desire to find meaning where none is guaranteed. Antarctica amplifies that desire because it resists it. The continent offers no easy answers, only shapes and silence. And so, we look harder, see more, and sometimes imagine more than is really there. The Black Pyramids, in that sense, are not just features of the land. They're symbols of the human habit of meaning-making. Whether or not they are natural, they tell a truth about us. When we see a triangle in the snow, our minds leap instantly to culture, history, civilization. We assume design, we imagine purpose, and that leap says more about how we evolved than about the ice itself. The same instinct that made ancient people carve faces into stone makes modern people interpret every odd photograph as evidence of intelligence. Both come from the same source, the refusal to let the universe remain random. There's comfort in pattern. The unknown is unsettling, but a pattern offers stability. Even when it's illusory, it feels right. That's why stories of lost civilizations, alien architects, or ancient maps find such ready audiences. They impose structure on chaos. They give reason to randomness. In a world that often feels disconnected, a hidden thread linking everything. Pyramids in Egypt, temples in Mexico, structures under Antarctic ice, offers coherence. It makes existence feel less accidental. But there's another layer to this pattern, one less mystical but equally profound. The human mind doesn't just find patterns, it creates them. We turn our experiences into sequences, our memories into narratives. We don't remember life as isolated moments, but as stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. Even when life is messy, the mind smooths it out into meaning. This narrative instinct applied to nature becomes mythology. Applied to data, it becomes science. Both are ways of telling stories about patterns, one emotional, one empirical, both driven by curiosity. Antarctica, by its very nature, resists narrative. It offers no landmarks, no markers, no continuity. To look at it is to confront the blank page of the planet. That's why our pattern-seeking instinct becomes so active there. When the eye finds a shape, even a simple triangle or a dark ridge, it latches on. It says, there, something familiar. The mind builds context instantly, wrapping the unknown in the comfort of recognition. The longer we look, the more layers of meaning we add. Soon, a random peak becomes a pyramid becomes a ruin, and a ruin becomes a civilization. All from a shadow in the snow. It's easy to think of that as foolish, but it's the same process that drives discovery. Every new scientific field began with someone noticing something strange and refusing to dismiss it. The trick is in what happens next, whether we test the pattern or worship it. The Antarctic pyramid theory stops at worship. Geology continues to test. Both are born from the same spark. When we recognize this, we can see how the human pattern shapes not just stories, but the very way we understand time. We imagine history as linear, civilizations rising and falling one after another, progress accumulating like layers of ice. But the planet's story isn't linear, it's cyclical. Warmth and cold, growth and extinction, erosion and creation, all repeat endlessly. Our pattern-loving brains turn that cycle into narrative arcs because that's how we think. We turn recurrence into progress, repetition into destiny. The pyramids, natural or otherwise, become milestones in that imagined line. Evidence, we tell ourselves, of where we came from and where we might return. When you step back and think about it, every culture on Earth has done the same thing. The ancient builders of megaliths, the astronomers of the desert, the storytellers of the ice, all of them saw patterns and gave them meaning. They aligned stones with solstices, carved spirals into rock faces, drew calendars from the movements of the sun and moon. They weren't guessing blindly. They were engaging in the oldest human art, translating the world's rhythms into human language. We still do it. Only now our tools are satellites and algorithms instead of stones and stars. The pattern remains, only the medium changes. In that way, Antarctica is the last great mirror of our species. It reflects not our technology or our civilizations, but our raw instinctive curiosity. It tempts us to find meaning where none is confirmed. The dark triangles in the snow are the modern equivalent of constellations. They remind us that even in an age of data and precision, we still long for mystery. We still see design in randomness, story in silence, civilization in the uninhabited. That longing isn't weakness. It's the heart of what keeps us exploring. The same pattern-seeking that creates myths also drives invention. Without it, we would never search for structure in DNA or symmetry in physics or rhythm in the universe. The danger is not in seeing patterns, but in stopping there. The wonder begins with the pattern. The truth comes from asking why it's there. In the case of Antarctica, that why leads us to geology, to climate, to the ancient dance between ice and rock. It leads us away from fantasy, but not away from fascination. The Black Pyramids, even as natural formations, remain incredible, products of time so immense that they dwarf imagination. So when we stare at those images and feel that jolt of recognition, that whisper that says someone made this, we're not wrong to listen. We're just hearing the echo of our own species, the oldest voice we have, saying what it has always said. Look closer. It's the same voice that led us to build our own pyramids, to chart the stars, to write, to measure, to seek patterns in everything from the shape of galaxies to the sound of our heartbeat. Antarctica is simply another surface for that voice to project onto. The ice becomes a screen for human curiosity. If the day comes when we've mapped every ridge and valley, drilled every core, and explained every anomaly, we'll still look for patterns elsewhere. We'll find them in new data, new worlds, new kinds of silence. Because the human pattern doesn't end with discovery. It begins there. It moves forward, always searching, always connecting, and Antarctica, with its endless white and hidden black, will remain part of that journey, not just as a landscape of ice, but as a reflection of how the mind sees itself in the shapes of the earth. And while the wind sweeps over the frozen peaks, reshaping them grain by grain, the story continues. Another image will appear, another shadow will align. Another mind, somewhere far from the cold, will see a triangle and feel the old thrill of recognition. The pattern will repeat, as it always does, because it's not just out there in the snow, it's in us, quietly guiding how we make sense of everything the world shows us, and everything it keeps hidden. When science meets the unknown, something interesting happens. It doesn't rush in with certainty. It listens first. It measures, records, and waits. Curiosity doesn't disappear when confronted with mystery. It becomes sharper. That's what has always drawn scientists to Antarctica. Beneath its coldness lies not emptiness, but complexity, a kind of vast puzzle the planet has left for us to solve. Every expedition, every sensor, every frozen sample is another small piece of that puzzle, each one revealing a little more about the world we thought we already knew. In a way, the entire history of science in Antarctica is a long conversation between curiosity and humility. From the first explorers who braved the white horizon with compasses and sketchbooks, to the modern researchers who orbit above it in satellites, the pattern is the same. We look, we ask, we find part of an answer, and the question grows larger. What began as a journey to measure geography became a search for origins, of climate, of life, of Earth itself. The scientific presence in Antarctica began officially in the early 20th century, but its roots go further back. The great age of exploration was still unfolding when the continent was finally confirmed to exist. Early maps had speculated for centuries about a terra australis incognita, a great southern land thought necessary to balance the continents of the north. When explorers finally reached it, they found not lush jungles or hidden empires, but a landscape so alien it seemed untouched by the same rules that shaped the rest of the Earth. That shock, that mismatch between expectation and reality, became the seed of modern Antarctic science. The early scientific missions were brutal. Teams built temporary camps in temperatures that froze, breath into ice crystals and winds that could strip skin. Instruments shattered, ink froze, and food supplies vanished in storms. Yet, even in those impossible conditions, data began to accumulate. They measured magnetism, temperature, and gravity. They collected rock samples from mountains that jutted through the ice like the bones of the planet. They realized that this continent, though lifeless on its surface, might hold the key to understanding the entire planet's history. Beneath its ice was a record, not of one moment, but of millions of years. By the mid-1900s, with the invention of radar and seismic technology, scientists began to see through the ice. What they found changed everything. Beneath the frozen surface lay not a flat bedrock, but mountains, valleys, and lakes sealed off from the atmosphere for eons. It was as if a second, secret Earth existed below the white crust. The radar images revealed the Gamburtsev Mountains, a massive hidden range buried under 2 miles of ice. No one expected mountains there, and yet they were as tall as the Alps. The discovery rewrote geology textbooks overnight. The ice was no longer a simple frozen layer. It was a translucent archive of landscapes we couldn't reach. That was when the mystery deepened. Because as the technology improved, so did the questions. The data showed magnetic anomalies, strange fluctuations that didn't match known patterns of rock composition. The ice in some areas reflected radar differently, as if concealing cavities or structures beneath. Most of these anomalies, when studied closely, turned out to have ordinary explanations, differences in density, mineral deposits, or layering of ice and rock. But not all of them were immediately understood, and where science hesitated, imagination rushed in. It's easy to see how such findings feed speculation. A buried mountain range, a few symmetrical peaks, odd readings from instruments. They sound like the ingredients of a hidden world. But the truth is that Antarctica is full of natural phenomena that look artificial until explained. Ice itself is unpredictable. It bends radar signals, scatters light, and reflects sound in inconsistent ways. What seems like a solid layer might conceal air pockets or water channels. Under certain conditions, radar can create false echoes, phantom shapes that vanish on the next pass. The more instruments we use, the more the data looks like illusion until it's carefully decoded. Yet the allure of the unknown persists. For scientists, that's not a problem, it's motivation. The Antarctic environment is so extreme that almost everything about it counts as unknown. Its atmosphere traps dust from other continents, its snow preserves chemicals from ancient eruptions, and its ice shelters organisms that have adapted to live in complete darkness. When researchers drill into those frozen layers, they're not just studying climate, they're studying time. Each core of ice is a chronological column of the planet's breath, a record of every volcanic ash cloud, every drought, every snowfall stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. In those cylinders of frozen memory, the Earth tells its own story, unfiltered by human bias. Some of the most extraordinary discoveries have come from below the ice rather than within it. Using radar and seismic data, scientists found networks of subglacial lakes, bodies of liquid water sealed away from sunlight for millions of years. The largest of these, Lake Vostok, lies nearly 4 kilometers beneath the surface. It's roughly the size of Lake Ontario and completely isolated from the atmosphere. When Russian researchers drilled into it in 2012, they found microbial life, tiny, hardy organisms that had survived in total darkness, feeding on minerals from the rock below. It was a reminder that life can persist under the most unlikely conditions. The finding reignited debates about where else in the universe life might exist. On the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, for example, where similar environments may exist beneath frozen crusts. Antarctica became a model, a natural laboratory for studying alien worlds without leaving Earth. Every discovery seems to widen the circle of mystery rather than close it. When scientists found microbes in the subglacial lakes, they began to ask whether entire ecosystems could exist beneath the ice, cut off from sunlight for millions of years. They found dormant viruses trapped in permafrost, perfectly preserved. They uncovered fossils of microscopic plants and animals that once lived in ancient Antarctic seas. And in one of the most surprising findings of all, they discovered meteorites, thousands of them, scattered across the ice. Antarctica, it turns out, is one of the best places on Earth to find rocks from space. The ice acts like a conveyor belt, collecting debris from across the continent and concentrating it in certain regions. Among these meteorites are some of the oldest materials ever studied, fragments from the early solar system, some even older than Earth itself. The connection between these discoveries and the myths of hidden civilizations is not as distant as it seems. Both stem from the same impulse, to look at the unknown and ask what it hides. The difference is that science keeps asking, even when the answers are smaller or stranger than expected. The data doesn't confirm pyramids or buried cities, but it reveals something just as profound. That the world beneath the ice is alive, dynamic, and ancient beyond imagination. It contains rivers that flow in darkness, mountains that have never seen the sky, and air bubbles that carry the breath of extinct forests. In that context, the idea of secrets beneath the ice isn't just romantic. It's literal. They're there, just not the kind we once imagined. When new satellite missions scan the continent, they don't only capture visible light. They use radar, infrared, and gravitational measurements. Each wavelength tells a different story. Infrared reveals temperature differences that hint at buried features. Radar penetrates the ice to show what lies below. Gravitational mapping detects density changes, revealing where rock gives way to water or voids. Combining all these tools, scientists can build three-dimensional maps of Antarctica's hidden interior. Those maps are astonishing, full of ridges, basins and hollows shaped by ancient forces. They show that beneath the ice sheet lies a landscape as complex as any continent, carved by rivers that no longer flow and lakes that have been sealed for millions of years. Even with all this technology, the continent still resists full understanding. The ice moves, distorts signals, and hides details. The data, for all its precision, still contains noise, strange readings that sometimes can't be explained immediately. Each time that happens, a familiar pattern emerges, speculation first, then slow, patient correction. It's a rhythm that repeats across all of science. Discovery isn't a straight line from question to answer, it's a spiral, circling closer to truth through trial, error, and persistence. In Antarctica, that persistence requires extraordinary coordination. Dozens of nations maintain research stations there, operating under the Antarctic Treaty, a global agreement that preserves the continent for science and peace. It's one of humanity's few large-scale acts of cooperation free from military or commercial interests. No one owns Antarctica. No one can mine it or claim it as territory. It belongs in a way to curiosity itself. That makes it unique. A place where science meets not only the unknown, but also the best version of what humans can be when we put wonder ahead of ownership. Inside those stations, life is both monotonous and profound. Researchers spend months or years in isolation, surrounded by nothing but white and sky. They study weather, geology, biology, physics, and sometimes themselves. They track auroras, measure the thickness of ozone, monitor shifting ice sheets. In winter, when the sun disappears for months, they keep working under artificial light, continuing the slow accumulation of data. The work is repetitive, the discoveries incremental, but over time, they build a picture of Earth's behaviour more detailed than anything humans have ever known. Sometimes the data raises questions even science can't immediately answer. There are anomalies in magnetic readings, irregularities in gravitational fields, unexplained warmth detected under deep ice layers. Most of these have reasonable geological causes: volcanic activity, groundwater flow, variations in rock composition. But until they're verified, they live in the same grey area as every great mystery, not yet proven, not yet dismissed. That grey area is where science and wonder overlap. It's where imagination fuels hypothesis, and hypothesis becomes research. When the unknown pushes back, science adapts. It doesn't claim omniscience, it measures, tests, and accepts uncertainty. That humility is what makes it powerful. The Antarctic pyramids, the rumours of hidden structures, the myths of lost civilizations, these may not hold up to scrutiny, but they serve as reminders of why we explore. Every legend begins as an observation that doesn't quite fit. Every anomaly invites attention. Sometimes the truth turns out to be more mundane, but sometimes it's more astonishing. Finding microbial life beneath 4 kilometers of ice is no less extraordinary than finding a forgotten city would be. It tells us that life itself can endure in conditions we once thought impossible. That discovery reshapes how we look at the universe. If life can survive in Antarctica's subglacial lakes, why not under the ice crust of Europa or Enceladus? If microbes can adapt to isolation, darkness and pressure for millions of years, then perhaps life elsewhere doesn't need sunlight or temperate climates. Antarctica becomes a proxy for other worlds. Mars in miniature, a cold rehearsal for exploration beyond Earth. The line between scientific research and cosmic wonder blurs. The same curiosity that once looked at mountains and saw pyramids now looks at ice and sees possibility. In the end, when science meets the unknown, the result isn't the death of mystery but its refinement. Each discovery reveals not final answers but deeper questions. The black peaks that inspired theories of lost civilizations may turn out to be natural formations, but their existence still connects us to something vast. The planet's ongoing dialogue with time. The ice continues to move, the data continues to flow, and human curiosity continues to interpret, measure, and imagine. The story doesn't end when science explains the unknown, it evolves. Somewhere right now, deep under the polar night, instruments are humming in silence, recording vibrations in the crust, temperatures in the ice, shifts in magnetic fields. Somewhere else, satellites are passing overhead, scanning the frozen landscape in wavelengths invisible to the eye. Every signal they send adds another line to a map that is still being drawn. A map not just of geography, but of understanding. The unknown doesn't shrink as we learn more, it grows, expanding to meet the edges of our knowledge. Antarctica, with all its cold precision and quiet wonder, remains the bridge between what we know and what we still dream about. The snow keeps falling, the ice keeps whispering its buried secrets, and the scientists keep listening. Because even when the world seems fully mapped, the unknown is always waiting, not as something to conquer, but as something to know more gently, more patiently, one measurement at a time. Beneath the ice, beneath the rock, beneath even the weight of continents shifting on the slow breath of the planet, there is an archive. It is not made of paper or stone tablets, nor carved inscriptions or ruins of cities, but of layers, sediment, ice, mineral, fossil, and dust. Each layer is a line in the autobiography of Earth, written not for readers but for endurance. The deep archive of the planet has no curator, no catalogue, no beginning, no end. It simply exists, quietly preserving everything that time forgets above the surface. And nowhere on Earth is that archive more complete, more untouched, or more eloquent than beneath Antarctica. What the rest of the world erases, Antarctica keeps. The deserts scour away history with wind, the oceans dissolve it, forests consume it in soil and growth, but ice remembers. It compresses, seals, and protects. Every snowflake that falls on the continent becomes part of a vertical library, its crystals recording temperature, atmospheric gases, and traces of what drifted through the air that year. Volcanic ash, pollen, cosmic dust, soot, salt. Layer upon layer, they build a chronology stretching back almost 1 million years, perhaps more in the places still unbored. To study an ice core is to hold a timeline in your hands, to touch the air that trees once breathed long before humans existed. Scientists call this paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates. They read ice cores the way historians read manuscripts. They slice them into thin sections, melt them carefully, and analyse the trapped gases. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, and oxygen. Their ratios tell the story of temperature cycles, of sudden changes and long calm periods. In those ratios lies the record of the planet's pulse. The ice preserves not just numbers but moods. It shows when the Earth exhaled warmth, when it drew in cold, when volcanoes dimmed the sky, when forests flourished. Each layer is an echo of light and air, compacted into silence. The first long ice cores extracted from Antarctica in the 1980s changed the way we understood climate. Before that, we could only guess at the rhythms of glaciation and thaw, but the cores revealed an astonishing regularity. Cycles of temperature rising and falling with the precision of tides. The planet, it turned out, breathes in patterns lasting tens of thousands of years. These cycles correspond to subtle shifts in Earth's orbit and tilt, known as Milankovitch cycles. When the tilt decreases, winters soften and summers cool. Ice spreads. When the tilt increases, the opposite happens. Glaciers retreat, oceans rise, and warmth returns. These fluctuations are small, but over millions of years they shape continents. The ice core data made the invisible visible. It showed that climate is not chaos but rhythm, a complex metronome keeping time across epochs. The deeper scientists drilled, the older the story became. Near the surface, each centimetre of ice represents a few years. At greater depths, compression distorts the layers, merging centuries into a single sheet. The oldest cores, from sites like Dome Sea and Vostok Station, reach nearly 3 kilometres down. The air trapped there dates back almost 1 million years. That means we can measure the atmosphere before agriculture, before language, before modern humans even appeared. The composition of that ancient air reveals the Earth's natural baseline, what the world was like before human activity altered it. It's the control sample for the experiment we're now living through. But the ice cores are only one part of the archive. Beneath them lies sediment, and within that sediment the geological memory of entire worlds. These layers record not just temperature and air, but the movements of continents, the birth and death of oceans, and the eruptions that reshaped the sky. Cores taken from the seabed off Antarctica's coast tell of forests that once grew there, pollen grains perfectly preserved, spores and leaves fossilized at the microscopic scale. Those cores are the bridge between the living past and the frozen present. They prove that the ice we see now covers what was once fertile ground, rivers, plains and forests that thrived when the world was warm. Some of the most compelling evidence comes from marine sediment cores drilled deep below the Southern Ocean. In those samples, scientists find chemical traces of ancient rainfall, isotope signatures from meltwater, and dust blown from deserts that no longer exist. The sediments show when Antarctica began to freeze, layer by layer, around 34 million years ago. They reveal that the first glaciers grew along mountain ranges before spreading outward to form the ice sheet that now dominates the continent. The transition was not sudden. It took millions of years, a slow drift from warmth into cold. That shift marked one of the most dramatic reorganizations of the planet's climate system. The Deep Archive preserves it in exquisite detail. What makes Antarctica's archive unique is not just its age, but its continuity. Elsewhere on Earth, the record is fragmented, eroded, submerged, or distorted by tectonic motion. But Antarctica's isolation has kept it stable. Its ice sheet acts like a vault, locking in everything that falls upon it. Even cosmic dust, particles from meteorites and distant stars accumulate there, embedding themselves in the snow. Scientists studying those layers find tiny metallic spheres and isotopic anomalies that reveal the frequency of extraterrestrial impacts. Each fragment tells of an event the planet absorbed without memory elsewhere. The archive beneath the ice is not only the history of Earth, it's a partial history of the solar system. This deep memory of the planet is delicate. To extract it, scientists must work with extraordinary precision. Drilling an ice core is not like digging for treasure, it's like performing surgery. The temperature, pressure, and contamination must be controlled perfectly. Even the heat of a human hand can alter the chemical balance of the sample. Once removed, the core is sealed in sterile containers and shipped to laboratories kept colder than most freezers. There, it's sliced into sections only millimeters thick, each one representing decades or centuries. The analysis takes years, and each result must be cross-checked against other cores, other locations, other proxies, tree rings, cave deposits, ocean sediments. The results often challenge assumptions. For instance, the ice reveals that climate change has never been smooth. It jumps, sometimes violently. Temperatures can shift by several degrees in a matter of decades. Sea levels can rise or fall rapidly. Ecosystems can collapse and rebuild. These abrupt changes remind scientists that stability is an illusion. The Deep Archive doesn't show a peaceful planet. It shows a restless one, constantly reinventing itself. Even during periods we call stable, small oscillations ripple through the system, feedback loops between ocean currents, atmospheric gases and solar cycles. The Earth is sensitive, reactive, alive in its own geological way. When scientists present these findings, they often speak in careful, measured tones, graphs, models, probabilities. But behind the data is awe. The ice they handle contains air exhaled by forests that no longer exist. The carbon in those bubbles once cycled through leaves, animals, and oceans before settling into stillness. To touch it is to touch time. The Deep Archive reminds us that we live inside a story already in progress, one that began long before our species and will continue long after. And yet, for all its vastness, the archive is not eternal. It depends on the very cold that created it. As the planet warms again, faster this time, driven by our own emissions, the ice begins to melt. The archive starts to vanish, layer by layer. Scientists race to retrieve as much as they can before it's gone. They call it rescuing ice. Each core removed from Antarctica today may be the last record of that part of history. Once the ice melts, the data it holds, the trapped air, the frozen dust, the isotopic balance, disappears forever. It's a strange irony. We're learning more about the planet's deep past just as we alter its future. Some researchers compare their work to archaeology, but on a planetary scale. They're excavating not artifacts but processes. The Earth's archive isn't organised by culture or event, it's organised by pressure, chemistry and decay. Every layer of rock and ice tells the story of a feedback loop, cause and effect woven together so tightly that they become one. Volcanoes release carbon dioxide, warming the atmosphere. Warmth melts ice, releasing more carbon dioxide trapped in permafrost. The cycle accelerates until something interrupts it, a shift in orbit, a drop in solar radiation, or the slow burial of carbon in the deep ocean. The archive preserves all of these mechanisms, teaching us how the planet self-regulates, how it breaks, and how it heals. What it doesn't contain, at least not yet, are direct traces of humanity older than a few thousand years. The ice preserves volcanic ash, pollen, meteorites, but not civilizations. It is indifferent to us. If anything, the layers from recent centuries are the first in which we appear clearly. They hold traces of lead from ancient Roman smelting, soot from the Industrial Revolution, radionuclides from nuclear tests, and plastics carried by wind and sea. Those will be our contribution to the Deep Archive, the faint chemical fingerprints of a species that changed the chemistry of the atmosphere itself. Future scientists, perhaps from another age or another world, would read that layer and know that something conscious once stirred here. Still, the archive is not a museum. It isn't meant to preserve for sentiment, it simply records. The Earth's memory is unbiased. It keeps everything, catastrophe and calm alike, without judgment. For scientists, that neutrality is both humbling and instructive. The record doesn't flatter us, but it teaches us how the planet behaves. It shows that change is constant, that balance is temporary, and that every stability is an interval between upheavals. The world beneath Antarctica's ice isn't a monument to lost civilizations. It's evidence that civilization itself is an anomaly, a brief pattern in a long sequence of transformation. But to know that doesn't diminish the wonder. If anything, it amplifies it. Because in the Deep Archive, every trace matters. A single bubble of air can tell the story of 1,000 years. A particle of dust can trace the path of a desert halfway across the globe. A fragment of pollen can confirm that forests once stood where glaciers now crawl. And all of it, every detail, every atom, remains preserved in silence until someone comes along to ask. The planet waits for questions. That's what the archive is. Not a collection of answers, but an invitation. Somewhere deep below the ice sheet, layers untouched by drill or radar still hold chapters we've never read. They might contain records of ancient magnetic reversals, or evidence of impacts from long-vanished comets, or traces of microbial life that adapted in ways we haven't imagined. Each layer is a page we've yet to turn. Each discovery shifts the outline of the story we think we're in. Science, for all its precision, has barely skimmed the surface of this memory. The deeper we go, the more intricate it becomes. The strange thing about this archive is that it isn't static. The ice moves, flows, and reshapes itself over time. It's both memory and motion, a paradox frozen into matter. The same glaciers that preserve history are also slowly erasing it, grinding rock into dust, carrying ancient air toward the sea. The planet is writing and rewriting itself at the same time, and through that process it maintains balance. Not perfect, but dynamic. The archive doesn't hold a single truth. It holds a million variations, all coexisting within the same cold silence. To stand above that silence, to know that beneath your feet lies the entire climate history of the world, is an experience most who visit Antarctica never forget. The air feels heavier there, not because of the cold, but because of the awareness that time has thickness. The ground isn't just ground. It's a vertical stack of centuries. Each step presses on years of snowfall, compressed into memory. The horizon stretches endlessly, but the real depth lies below. Every gust of wind carries flakes that will someday become part of that same record. The process never stops. The planet continues to archive itself, sentence by sentence, without pause. And as scientists drill deeper, as they measure and interpret, they're not just looking backward, they're looking forward too. The archive reveals not only what was, but what might be. By studying past warming events, we learn how oceans respond, how ice sheets retreat, how ecosystems shift. The patterns in the data allow predictions, not prophecies, but informed expectations. The past, preserved so carefully under the ice, becomes a guide to the future we're shaping now. That is the quiet irony of Antarctica's mystery. The legends speak of civilizations buried beneath the ice, but what truly sleeps there is civilization's context, the record of everything that made life possible in the first place. It's a story of temperature, chemistry, motion, and resilience. The Deep Archive doesn't hide secrets of human origin. It holds the secret of planetary endurance. It shows how a world can survive its own extremes, how warmth and cold take turns steering the course of time. Even now, as drills hum and data streams to satellites, the archive remains mostly unread. It stretches beyond what we can reach, deep into rock, and deeper still into time. Every meter closer reveals another question. How far back does the memory go? How complete is it? And what, if anything, lies below the oldest ice, in the sediments and stones that remember a world with no humans, no mammals, no forests, just water and fire and light? The answers will come slowly, as they always do. Science moves through patience. The planet keeps writing while we learn how to read. Somewhere under the frozen crust, the next discovery waits. Quiet, precise, and utterly indifferent to our anticipation. The deep archive of the planet is not waiting to be found. It is simply there, recording, as it always has, and above it, the snow keeps falling, each flake another data point, another sentence in the story that will one day be read when someone asks again what the Earth remembers, and how far back that memory truly goes. Between myth and memory lies the narrowest of spaces. It's where imagination touches evidence, where belief meets data, where the human need for story collides with the planet's quiet truth. It's the space where Antarctica has always lived in our minds. Part science, part dream, part mirror. When we talk about pyramids in the snow, or lost civilizations beneath the ice, what we're really describing is that in-between world, the one where history fades into possibility and the unknown takes on the shape of something familiar. The myths we make about the Earth are not separate from the science we pursue. They grow from the same root: wonder. Long before anyone had tools to measure or drill, before maps or satellites, people still tried to understand what lay beyond sight. They told stories because stories could hold what facts could not yet explain. The early explorers who imagined lands at the bottom of the world were doing what humans always do when confronted by blank space. They filled it with meaning. Terra Australis Incognita wasn't drawn from evidence but from intuition, the sense that balance demanded something unseen. If there were lands to the north, there must be lands to the south. The map had to feel complete. That instinct to complete the picture still shapes how we think. Science fills in what myth once outlined, but the outline itself remains. Each discovery, no matter how factual, enters a field already seeded with story. When satellites revealed Antarctica's sharp peaks, people didn't just see mountains, they saw echoes of old ideas. Atlantis under ice, forgotten builders, secrets preserved in the cold. The image arrived into a waiting myth, and the myth welcomed it. That's how memory and imagination cooperate. The mind doesn't discard its stories when facts arrive. It adapts them. Myth, in its oldest sense, was never meant to deceive. It was a way of carrying truth before there was evidence to hold it. The flood stories, the tales of worlds lost to fire or ice, the visions of gods descending from the sky, all of them preserved observations and fears that couldn't yet be explained. When glaciers advanced and villages disappeared, people remembered, but they remembered in symbols. A god's wrath, a cosmic punishment, a drowning of the world, all of it encoding real events in emotional language. The myth kept the memory safe until science could one day translate it. Antarctica fits perfectly into that pattern. It's both real and unreachable, ancient and untouched. It invites projection, because it refuses detail. Standing at the edge of knowledge, it looks exactly like the landscapes of old mythology, distant, cold, and absolute. In a sense, the continent itself is a myth made tangible. It's the place we point to when we need a setting for what doesn't fit anywhere else. Secrets, beginnings, endings, all find a home there. It absorbs them the way ice absorbs everything quietly without protest. When scientists began to uncover its true history, the forest beneath, the fossils, the evidence of warm seas and green valleys, they found that reality was just as incredible as legend. The difference was tone, not substance. Where myth spoke in stories, science spoke in data, but both described transformation. The earth warming and freezing, life adapting and vanishing, continents drifting apart, and it's the same tale told in two dialects. One poetic, one empirical, both trying to say the same thing. The world changes, but it remembers. The memory of the planet isn't orderly, it's fragmented, layered, often contradictory. The memory of people is the same. That's why myth and science keep circling each other, filling gaps the other leaves open. When evidence is missing, imagination steps in. When imagination goes too far, evidence reins it back. Between the two, understanding grows. The Antarctic pyramids live precisely in that gap. Too geometric to ignore, too ambiguous to confirm. They're not proof of anything hidden, but they're proof of how the human mind negotiates uncertainty. We can't leave ambiguity alone, we turn it into meaning. There's something profoundly human about that. The first astronomers connected stars into constellations not to impose false order, but to find a handle on infinity. The first storytellers gave faces to thunder and fire not to control them, but to coexist with them. The impulse is the same today. We see something unexplained in satellite imagery and build a story around it. The tools have changed, but the psychology hasn't. Between myth and memory is where we build bridges to understanding, sometimes wobbly, sometimes wrong, but always driven by curiosity. In the scientific stations scattered across Antarctica, that curiosity still drives everything. Researchers spend years collecting ice cores, measuring seismic tremors, and mapping the land beneath the ice. They're looking for patterns, not to confirm myths, but to replace speculation with understanding. And yet, even among them, the myth never disappears entirely. It lingers in conversation, in the way they describe the landscape. Many of them speak of the ice as if it were alive, as if it listened. Some call it the planet's memory. Others say it feels like standing inside time itself. These are not scientific statements, but they express something science can't. The emotional scale of what they're witnessing. The data from those cores confirms things myth could only guess. That the Earth has frozen and thawed many times, that warmth and cold follow patterns, that extinction and renewal are natural rhythms. But it also introduces new mysteries. Why do some changes happen so suddenly? Why do others unfold so slowly? What triggers the leap from one climate state to another? For all our knowledge, there's still a frontier between what we can measure and what we can only imagine. That frontier is the modern form of myth, a set of questions too large for answers, too persistent to ignore. Sometimes, the two forms of knowing blur entirely. When scientists describe the ice as remembering, they're speaking metaphorically, but the metaphor is accurate. The ice really does preserve the chemical signature of the past. It's as close as we can get to a literal memory of the planet. Myths work the same way. They preserve emotional signatures, what an event felt like, what it meant to those who lived through it. One records atmosphere, the other emotion. Together, they form a whole picture, the physical and the psychological memory of the world. If we look at the myth of lost civilizations through that lens, it stops being absurd and becomes understandable. The stories of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of lands swallowed by sea or ice, they're not random fantasies. They're expressions of an ancient awareness that the world changes violently. People saw coastlines drown, islands vanish, climates shift. They remembered, but they remembered symbolically. The myth carried the lesson. Nothing lasts forever, and knowledge can be lost as easily as land. Antarctica, with its buried forests and frozen mountains, embodies that lesson perfectly. It is a visible reminder of how complete disappearance can be. That's why the idea of civilizations under the ice feels so resonant even when evidence says otherwise. It speaks to a deeper truth, that history is fragile, that memory fades, and that entire worlds can vanish while the planet goes on. The myth gives that truth a shape we can understand. It turns geological change into narrative, entropy into story. When we say there might be pyramids under the ice, we're really saying we can imagine our own impermanence. We can picture the future archaeologists, whoever they might be, drilling down through our ruins the way we drill through the ice, finding traces of a civilization and wondering who we were. In that sense, the line between myth and memory is also the line between past and future. What we tell ourselves about what came before is usually a reflection of what we fear or hope will come next. Myths of lost worlds often appear in times of change, when the climate shifts, when technology transforms society, when people sense instability. They're cautionary tales disguised as nostalgia. They say, once we had something beautiful and we lost it. Be careful not to repeat the pattern. The Antarctic legend functions that way too. It reminds us that a world can freeze over without noticing, that civilization can disappear under its own weight of denial. Science doesn't contradict that warning, it strengthens it. The ice cores show how abrupt environmental shifts can be. They reveal that when carbon levels rise quickly, the planet responds dramatically. It doesn't take millions of years, sometimes just centuries. The frozen record is a mirror for our own moment. The myth of Atlantis, of a great civilization undone by its own hubris, feels less like fiction and more like foresight when read beside the data. Between myth and memory, the warning remains the same. The world changes, with or without us. But there's another way to see that relationship, not as conflict, but as collaboration. Myth makes us care. Science makes us understand. One gives meaning, the other gives method. When they meet, knowledge becomes alive. The pyramids in Antarctica may not be real, but the fascination they inspire drives genuine inquiry. People read, watch, ask questions, explore. Some end up studying geology or climatology because a story sparked something in them. Curiosity doesn't care where it begins. It only cares that it keeps going. The myths light the fire. Science carries the flame. In the grand timeline of human thought, the transition from myth to science wasn't a clean break. It was a slow evolution. The same wonder that once made people worship the sun eventually made them measure it. The same reverence for stars that birthed astrology also birthed astronomy. The boundary between believing and knowing is porous, shifting like the edge of a glacier. We move back and forth across it, sometimes in the same breath. Even the most rational among us still feel awe, and awe is the birthplace of both myth and science. Antarctica, in its strange purity, amplifies that feeling. It offers almost nothing to see, and yet contains everything worth knowing. Standing on its surface is like standing between myth and memory physically, above the preserved history of the Earth, surrounded by the emptiness where imagination thrives. The silence there doesn't contradict the stories, it invites them. It's as if the planet left a blank page for us to keep writing on, knowing we would never stop trying to describe what it means to exist on such a restless world. The myths we tell about hidden pyramids and ancient civilizations will fade eventually, replaced by new ones. But the impulse that created them will remain. Future generations will have their own mysteries, their own frozen worlds to interpret, their own balance between story and evidence, and when they look back they'll see that we too lived between myth and memory, building meaning out of what we didn't yet understand, piecing together the truth of a planet that has always been older, deeper, and more patient than we can comprehend. Somewhere, deep in the ice, air bubbles still hold the trace of volcanic smoke, pollen, and salt from forgotten oceans. Above them, the myths of civilizations whisper through modern voices. Both layers, in their own way, preserve memory. Both belong to the same continuum, the one where knowledge begins not with proof, but with wonder. The ice will keep its secrets, the stories will keep evolving. Between them, the dialogue continues, slow and eternal, like the shifting of glaciers beneath a silent, unbroken sky. Sometimes it feels as though the world is watching us, not in the way of a sentient thing with eyes or will, but as a presence that holds everything quietly, patiently, as if recording. When we look at Antarctica from above, through satellite images or through the window of an aircraft, what we're seeing is not emptiness. We're seeing attention. The stillness of that place feels alive, but not in a way that moves or speaks. It observes, it contains, it endures, and in that endurance it becomes something more than landscape. It becomes a mirror, the stillness that watches us back. Everything that has lived has looked outward. That is the nature of life, to sense, to respond, to reach. But the planet itself, through its vast patience, reflects that gaze. It doesn't react, yet it records. When we build, it remembers the pressure of our weight. When we burn, it remembers the heat in its atmosphere. When we speak of history, the world answers by showing us time carved into rock and ice. It doesn't correct us, but it shows what endures and what fades. In that way, Antarctica is the clearest reflection of the relationship between humanity and the Earth. We are temporary motion. It is continuous stillness. Standing in that stillness, if one ever has the chance, is not like standing anywhere else. Sound barely travels. Even one's own breath feels foreign, too warm, too fast. There are no trees to rustle, no insects to hum, no cities to murmur in the distance. The wind, when it moves, does so without pattern. It doesn't sing. It scrapes, shifts, and then goes quiet again. The horizon feels closer than it should be, not because of distance, but because there's nothing to scale it. The light, reflected from every direction, flattens everything into this solemn quiet tone. There's no above or below, No foreground or background, only space. And in that space, awareness turns inward. For the scientists who live there, that awareness becomes a constant companion. They speak of it sometimes in journals or interviews, describing how isolation changes their perception. Days blur, time becomes circular. They begin to feel as though the ice itself is listening, not in a mystical sense, but as a presence that absorbs everything. The data they gather, temperature readings, radar signals, chemical samples, feels like a conversation with something vast and indifferent. They measure, they record, and the Earth answers only in increments. The numbers arrive, and behind them lies silence. That silence is the same stillness that has watched everything else pass. Oceans forming, mountains rising, civilizations flickering into and out of existence. There's something paradoxical about that stillness. It feels eternal, but it's not static. The ice moves constantly, a creeping motion of glaciers flowing like thick rivers, carrying rock, dust, and time. Yet the motion is too slow for us to perceive. It appears frozen because our sense of time is too brief. The stillness is an illusion created by scale. The ice is always moving, always reshaping the land beneath, always whispering forward. But to us, who live and die in such short spans, it appears like a single held breath. That illusion is comforting and humbling at once. It reminds us how narrow our perception really is. The idea that Antarctica might hold secrets, pyramids, ruins, messages from before, fits naturally into that stillness. When something refuses to reveal itself, the imagination supplies what might be hidden. Yet perhaps what's hidden there isn't a civilization, but a reflection of our own need to believe the world is aware of us. The stillness feels sentient because it responds without responding. It accepts everything, never arguing, never correcting. It's an ancient kind of intelligence, not conscious but comprehensive. It holds all events equally, from the fall of empires to the birth of microbes. Nothing escapes it. That may be why standing there can feel like standing before something alive. Some researchers describe moments when they feel watched, though they know there's nothing watching. It's the awareness of being tiny against something immense, a landscape so complete it doesn't require witnesses. The stillness is not observing us because it cares. It's observing us because we exist within its field. It's the same awareness one might feel when looking up at the night sky, realizing that the universe doesn't look back with interest, but with inclusion. Antarctica carries that same neutrality. Its gaze is not judgment, not affection, not hostility. It's simply total presence. There's a story told by an old glaciologist who spent years drilling cores in East Antarctica. He said that when he held a freshly cut section of ice, still clear and perfect, he could see tiny bubbles sparkling inside, trapped for hundreds of thousands of years. Each one contained air from a world that no longer existed. He said it was like holding breath from a ghost. That was how he described it. The ghost of the planet's own memory. Those bubbles were not just data, they were witnesses. Every one of them was part of the stillness that watched the world change, quietly storing what happened. The scientist said it felt as though the ice wasn't dead at all. It was simply waiting. Waiting is what the Earth does best. It doesn't hurry, doesn't insist, doesn't interfere. It lets everything unfold in its own time. And when we dig, when we measure, when we theorize, we're really interrupting that waiting for a moment, borrowing a small sample of its patience to understand our place in it. The deep archive of the planet hidden beneath the ice is the physical expression of that patience. It is time made visible, preserved through the most passive act imaginable, freezing. The stillness that watches us back is the same force that froze that history into form. Even from orbit, the continent seems detached from the rest of the planet. It's almost featureless, a blank counterweight to the busy texture of the inhabited world. And yet that blankness exerts influence over everything. It regulates ocean currents, drives weather patterns, reflects sunlight back into space. Its silence controls the rhythm of global climate. It's not passive at all. It's quiet in the way a heartbeat is quiet, constant, essential, almost unnoticed. The stillness we see is not absence but concentration. All of Earth's slowest, most powerful processes converge there, below the threshold of human urgency. When people imagine Antarctica as lifeless, they miss the subtle truth. The ice shelters more life than we can easily comprehend, though not in the forms we're used to. Microbes inhabit brine pockets between crystals. Fungi and bacteria live in the rock under the ice, feeding on trace minerals. In subglacial lakes, ecosystems persist in complete isolation, powered by chemical reactions rather than sunlight. These are the Earth's quietest forms of life, and they have adapted perfectly to patience. They live in cycles so slow that generations may pass without change. They don't struggle, they endure. They are part of the stillness too, living expressions of the planet's calm persistence. It's strange to realize that, in geological terms, humans are new noise in this long silence. We've existed for only a fraction of a moment in the planet's timeline, yet our activity already echoes across it. The gases we release, the materials we extract, the heat we generate, all of it becomes part of the record. The stillness watches and keeps note. Future layers of ice will hold traces of our presence, as they now hold traces of meteors and volcanic eruptions. Our entire civilization will become a few millimeters of compressed dust in that grand archive. Our noise reduced to chemical residue. To the planet, even our loudest moments are whispers. But this perspective isn't meant to belittle us. It connects us. To be small within something immense is not to be irrelevant. It's to be part of a larger equilibrium. The stillness doesn't exclude us. It includes us. We're not outside the system, looking in. We're within it, part of what the ice records, part of what the world remembers. Every human act, from exploration to storytelling, becomes another layer in that shared memory. Even our myths, about pyramids, about lost worlds, about secrets in the snow, are part of how the Earth knows itself through us. We are the storytelling organ of the planet, turning experience into meaning, transforming geology into narrative. There's a symmetry in that. The planet keeps physical memory, we keep emotional memory. Between the two, the full record exists. The ice remembers conditions, and we remember feelings. Together, they form the twin halves of awareness: matter and mind, observation and interpretation. This stillness that watches us back is complete because it includes both. It allows us to measure and to imagine, to find comfort in precision and in wonder. When we stare at the frozen horizon and feel something vast moving quietly inside us, that's the exchange taking place. The world recognizing itself in our gaze. In a practical sense, science will continue to map every part of Antarctica. Satellites will refine their measurements. Radar will reveal hidden lakes and mountains. The mystery will shrink, but the awe will not. Because the real mystery isn't the unknown. It's the known seen clearly. Even when every glacier is charted and every anomaly explained, the stillness will remain. It's not a mystery to be solved, but a condition to be understood. It's the reminder that not all significance comes from motion or change. Some of it comes from endurance, from holding steady while everything else transforms. At the edges of the continent, where the ice meets the sea, enormous slabs break away and drift north. The sound of it can travel for miles, a thunderous crack followed by a long, deep silence. Those icebergs carry with them layers of ancient snow, air from old atmospheres, tiny particles of dust from times when the world was different. As they melt, they release those memories back into the ocean, distributing them into circulation. Even the act of melting becomes a continuation of the record. Nothing is truly lost. The stillness moves slowly, but it never stops moving. If one listens to recordings made beneath the ice, seismic sensors translating vibration into sound. The continent hums. It produces low-frequency tones as glaciers grind against rock and as waves strike the ice shelves. It's not a song, but it's not silence either. It's the voice of motion stretched across time. It's the sound of the planet thinking, if one could call it that. The stillness that watches us back is not mute. It speaks in frequencies too slow for our ears. Science translates those sounds into data, graphs, and models. But somewhere behind that translation, there's a simpler truth, that the world is always speaking, and we are only beginning to listen. The Antarctic landscape in its endless white makes that listening possible. There are no distractions, no noise, no movement but the slow drift of snow. Every shape and colour is subdued to the same pale tone, which forces attention inward. When people return from expeditions there, they often describe a kind of mental quiet that doesn't fade easily. They say it changes how they see the rest of the world. Cities feel louder, colours brighter, time faster. The contrast makes the stillness unforgettable. It's not peace exactly, it's presence. The realisation that even in silence something vast is unfolding, and you are inside it. Perhaps that's why Antarctica attracts so many myths. It's not just because it's remote, or because it hides its details under ice. It's because it embodies something we've lost, the experience of being surrounded by a world that doesn't need us but still includes us. The stillness doesn't offer meaning, it invites it. It leaves space for our stories to echo without interruption. Every legend about civilizations beneath the ice is a reflection of that invitation. We tell stories not because the world is empty, but because it's full beyond our comprehension. The stillness gives us room to imagine what might fill it. When we speak of the earth as alive, as remembering, as watching, we're not assigning it human qualities. We're recognizing that its processes and our awareness share a rhythm. Both observe, both respond, both adapt. The difference is speed. The planet's time is measured in ages, hours in moments. When those scales overlap, when we sense geological patience within our fleeting lives, the result feels like reverence. The stillness that watches us back is that reverence made visible. It's not a god, not a consciousness, but the recognition that existence itself is vast enough to reflect awareness back at us. And so the story continues, as it always has, with snow falling over stone, ice deepening its layers, winds reshaping the same dunes of frozen air. Above that slow movement we continue to wonder. The myths fade and return, the data refines, the instruments advance, and through it all the stillness remains, constant, impartial, observing. It doesn't end because it never began. It is the baseline of the planet, the silent rhythm beneath every noise we make. The pyramids, the mountains, the legends, the science, all are moments within that vast gaze. Somewhere far beneath, air bubbles wait, carrying fragments of time we'll never breathe again. Somewhere on the surface, a small team of researchers walks between instruments, their footsteps marking the top layer of what will one day be history. Above them, satellites pass, mapping the same whiteness from orbit. Below them, microbes persist, waiting for conditions to shift again. Everything moves, but the stillness holds. It's not a contradiction, it's the design. The earth doesn't choose between motion and calm. It carries both perfectly. When the last data is collected, when the myths have evolved into new forms, and when our brief noise has settled back into the larger quiet, the stillness will still be there. Not as something watching us out of memory or sorrow, but simply as what it has always been, the steady presence beneath everything. It will keep recording layer by layer, sound by sound, breath by breath, for as long as there is snow to fall and wind to move it. And somewhere, perhaps in another age, someone will look back at this moment, at us, at our wonder, at our questions, and find it preserved in the ice. They'll see traces of warmth, of change, of curiosity, They'll see that we too once stood in the stillness and felt it looking back, not as mystery or threat, but as confirmation that we were part of something enduring. And the ice, silent as ever, will hold that awareness without comment, keeping it exactly as it keeps everything else, within the stillness that has always watched and always will,